From Doomed to Fail. We are the podcast that brings you history's most notorious disasters and epic failures twice a week. And this week, we are going to do a large re-release and tell you about 3 times that major cities burned down. We'll talk about the Great Fire of London, the Great Chicago Fire, and the Great San Francisco Fire, which actually was caused by the earthquake. So here's 4 episodes for you. If you haven't heard them, let us know what you think. And thank you for...
In the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA097.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
And we are back and firmly in 2024.
Been
Hi,
great
Taylor.
so far. Hello.
Has it been the best 24 for you?
Been the best. Just the best.
I am very excited about this year. It is going to be a presidential year, which is always
Always
fun
exciting. Yeah.
because politics is entertainment, and we like that.
I know.
We
I
like
love it.
that serious topics are now subject to sound bites and TikTok clips. That's actually pretty good.
I know. Cool.
So, welcome to Doom to Fail. I'm Forrest, joined here by Taylor, and we are a podcast about the ever-evolving topic of what to cover on a day-to-day basis, although it generally has a tragic concept to it, or a
Yeah.
forlorn element to it, or something along those lines. So, as we iterate, just let us know if anything's resonating at all. If anything at all is resonating. We'll take it. Whatever
Woohoo.
you got.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
So I covered the lovely and toxic Salton Sea earlier this week. We are moving on to a topic that Taylor has chosen, which I do not know at all. So I'll kick it over to you, Taylor.
Awesome. So I said water is our through line, and I'm definitely going to be drinking water as my themed drink during this one, um, because I want to talk about fire and a historical fire. There's a bunch of big ones, but this one I'm not going to make you guess because I just feel like there's a lot of historical fires, and I don't know. Do you know any?
Chicago
It's
and San
important.
Francisco.
Okay, neither of those. It's in Europe. Um, it is the Great Fire of London in 1666.
Taylor, can I give you another through line?
Yeah.
So with the Salton Sea episode, if the San Francisco fire hadn't happened, then they probably would have blocked it up and the Salton Sea never would have existed because there was a dredge they needed to dig out the canal, and they
Hmm.
couldn't get it because the whole city was burning down.
Oh my God, I can't wait for the water wars. It's going to be real great, real fun, real Mad
Yes.
Maxy around here.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Fun. So, have you ever watched this is funny. Have you watched Tacoma FD? It's on HBO and it's going to be on Netflix soon.
No.
It's great. It is by the Broken Lizard guys who do like Beer Fest and
Yeah.
Super Troopers. Yeah. And they're amazing. And I just wanted to shout that out because I really love it. So I've been learning a lot about, I've been watching this fireman show. I've watched it. We've watched the whole thing twice. It's just really, really funny. So shout out to that show. But today I'm going to talk about the Great Fire of London. It destroyed 5/6 of London. So most of it
It's a
was destroyed.
big swath.
Big swath. So first let's talk about firefighting and fire dependent societies. So we're so lucky that we don't have to have an open flame constantly in our homes. Like most of the world for history, like you had candles and you had fire and it was just so dangerous and there was so much fire around. Like I have a gas stove and matches just in case there's an emergency, but like I don't have a fire constantly. As soon as it gets dark outside, I don't need to like light 100 candles, you know?
I've been lighting candles this week because I like them.
That's different than like needing them, you know?
It's true.
But also remember the Zappos guy died in that like shed lighting candles and drinking vodka?
Wait, the Zappos guy's dead?
Yeah, like the guy who had like started Zappos, he died in like because he loved expensive candles and vodka and he was like in someone's shed and like fire is dangerous is part of my point. Still is, but we're not
Oh
dependent
my
on it the
God,
way
you're
we
right.
used
He
to be.
did die.
Yeah, isn't that horrible?
Wait, he died in a shed? He
Yeah, it was like in like the Hamptons.
was in a
Isn't it that
house
thing?
fire in New London, Connecticut. Nobody knew who he was because he was burned to a crisp, but he became trapped in a pool shed during the fire. Oh my God, my table stand is moving.
It looks like your chair is going down. Isn't that awful? So yeah, fires continues to be very dangerous if you're not careful.
He was
Please be careful.
47 years old. Can you imagine being
He
like
had a
a
lot going on.
billionaire,
No,
47 years old? Like, God.
yeah, absolutely horrible. So yeah, so fire's still super, super dangerous. Um, Also, it's really dark. And so there's like another book that a book that I have called The Invention of Murder that I've read part of, and it starts off talking about like Victorian England, but like as soon as it got dark, it was dark. People would like get lost in the streets all the time. Like you couldn't see anything in a lot of these places, like as soon as it was dark. So you had to have candles constantly. And like the street lamps were fires, all those things. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Um, so even now, my mom was talking about it. We're all getting this Instagram ad for a fire blanket to like put over your stove if it catches on fire to like kick it go out because like we don't even know how to use our fire extinguishers. Like we should remember how to use those. But for most of history, everything could have caught on fire. And people, as cities began to build, obviously people live in closer and closer, and there's way more chance that everything's going to go up in flames. And then also water. This is like our through line. Water is really heavy. It's hard to get water places. Like even when they have those big forest fires, you can't just like douse it with water. It just like doesn't happen. And I did look up because I wasn't sure what it was that you know how planes drop that like pink stuff on
Yeah.
forest fires? That's actually a chemical called Phos-Chek, Phos, Phos-Chek. It's a fertilizer-based liquid, and it coats the vegetation in a fire-resistant layer. That's not to put out the fire, that's to stop the fire from going any further. And there's
Okay.
also like, yeah, and there's also like a ton of stuff that like, some things are controlled burns and some things need to be, set on fire to be able to like have the land grow and all those things. But it's really hard to put out like a huge fire is part of the point. And they can just put a wildly small amount of water on it at a time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you don't put a fire out. You exhaust its ability to keep firing.
exactly. Exactly. So let's talk about how we've done that, like around history. So I have a little bit of like a history of firefighting. In ancient Rome, there were volunteers who would use um, they would watch out for fires. So like in all these stories, like before communication systems, someone would like ring a bell and be like, there's a fire over here, and people would like come and like try to help. So they started doing that in ancient Rome. Obviously, they did it before. In medieval Europe, there was fire brigades, which are also mostly volunteers, and they used like buckets of water. There was some like spraying devices that they had, but they had to like fill carts with water and like get it to the fire, you know? Um, do you know, and then also this is when around the medieval times is they started to do hook and ladders. Have you heard like a hook and ladder company for like a fire thing?
No, but I can
Have you heard that
assume it's a
term?
ladder that has a hook on it that you can like settle on things, right?
That's what I thought it was, but it's actually not. So like a ladder, obviously is a ladder, but the hooks are for pulling buildings down around the fire. So as soon as like a house catches on fire, the hook is made to pull the houses around it down so the fire cannot spread, like you were saying.
Oh,
Does that make sense?
interesting.
Yeah.
Wait, so if my neighbor's house caught fire, they would destroy my house?
Yes.
That seems a little harsh.
It sucks. But like you'd have to because your house is so close together, you know?
That's why you gotta move to Texas where nothing is close to anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, especially like I'll tell you a little bit about how the houses looked like in 1666, but they were just like unbelievably close together. Um, there were also like brigades. I'm sure you've heard of that, where you like pass a bucket down and do that. I mean, it takes forever, but it's still like it happens. Um, Formal fire departments started to come in like the late 1600s because of this. The first fire department in the United States was founded in Boston in 1678. In the 19th century, the steam-powered fire engines were really helpful. And then obviously now you have like your gigantic fire truck that can hook up to the sewer system and do all those things, right?
I don't think that's sewer water that they
Not the
pour it.
sewer system, but like, like it's the same thing. Like that's what it's called. It's called the sewer system. The water that comes.
The sewer's full of shit. They're not
No, I
taking
understand that,
shit
but it's
water out of hydrants and then pouring it on
when you're connected
houses.
to like the city water, it's like the city water, but it's the same company as the
Taylor, are
sewers.
you under the impression that when you turn on like a faucet in your house, that is also connected to your septic tank?
No, it's just that I think it's all the kind of the same thing. What
Taylor's
kind of
Googling.
water is in fire hydrants? I think it's like
Oh,
the same thing.
At the very
From
worst,
the,
I would assume it's like gray water.
it's just it's regular drinking water, but it comes from the whole system of water. Like the sewer system isn't separate from the water system. It's the same group that does it, right?
Let's carry on.
Okay, I don't care. Um,
We're gonna
anyway,
be stuck on this topic for like way too long.
um, so another thing that came out of this was actually the invention of fire insurance. The first insurance company in London was the Fire Office that was established in 1680, and it is the origin of modern insurance because they didn't really have that before this. But then they started to like do that, and they would do things obviously that like is super fucked up. Like houses that were insured would have like a little mark on them so that firefighters would prioritize those houses over other houses.
It's still fucked up. Like insurance is like such a scam. Like if something goes wrong, they will never pay or take forever to pay. But
Yeah,
God forbid you don't make it. I mean, not that I've ever missed a payment, but like still, I would assume if I missed a payment, they would raise hell about it.
yeah. Totally. Totally. I mean, we had a guy come when we had a leak in our roof and he gave us a good quote, but it was a pain in the ass.
Wait,
We had to
with
get
your
fixed.
insurance company?
Hmm.
So you called the insurance company and then they sent somebody?
Hmm.
Yeah, get your own quote. They're gonna send someone cheap.
No, 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 no. They sent a guy to look at it and then they sent us money to pay for it however we wanted to.
No, fun. Okay,
Yeah,
well,
which
you have good
which was nice.
insurance.
I do. Um, so anyway, so we're in London. So that's kind of like the history of firefighting. It's obviously hard, and as like cities are being built, it's getting harder. In 1666 in London, it is the Restoration period. King Charles II has just been crowned. He's a new king. And right before this, Oliver Cromwell had been um, in charge of England, but he wasn't a king, and he had been in charge of killing Charles, not in charge, one of the people who had signed the death order over Charles I. So all this stuff that I don't know, but it's tense. And people think that like the Cromwellians are going to come back and like fight for power. So it's still like tense politically. They're also just out of the plague. Because the plague killed a shit ton of people and it's still around. Some people claim that the fire is the thing that stopped it for good because it burned down and it killed a bunch of rats, obviously. But it was already kind of waning down and people were starting to recover from it. But that had been like obviously super traumatic. A ton of people had died, you know.
Yeah,
Um, England was in the middle of two wars. They were fighting the French because they were always fighting the French and also the Dutch. So there was like that going on. And London itself was growing so fast. It was like the fastest growing city in the world. There were different parts like Westminster wasn't officially a part of London, but it like became a part of London. It was a lot of sprawl going out. There was still the Roman wall around a lot of it because the Romans left in 400, but the wall was still there.
it's crazy.
And yeah, and like do you remember how they left and then the English didn't know how to fix anything, so everything just kind of collapsed because they like didn't know how to how to fix aqueducts. They didn't know how to maintain the wall. They didn't know how to do anything else, so they just kind of like collapsed into the Middle Ages
Jeez.
because Romans left. So, um, but London is huge. So there's anywhere between like 250 and 450,000 people in the city, which is pretty major. And there's also a ton of people that are in and out of the city during the day to like trade and do things. So it's very, very busy. There are pipes that run water through the city, but it is not like a modern like pipe system. Um, the houses have a lot of they're made out of wood, have a lot of thatched roofs, and this is when like they rebuild it a lot in stone, but it started off being, made of wood. And they're also growing in a way that like, have you ever seen a picture of an old house that has like a smaller first floor than the second or third floors?
Oh yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because like the
we
only way,
we did we like just talk about that? About there was a house you showed me, like an old house, and it had been in someone's family for like 1,000 years, and the bottom was like this narrow little thing, and the top was like this big old.
I don't remember, but I
Maybe I
know.
just looked at houses for myself. I don't know.
Yeah. But like, but you can picture it. And so like what that meant was, so they were trying to like get more space, obviously. So they would build up and they would build out. So in the middle of the roads, the houses were getting closer and closer where you could like shake your neighbor's hand through your bedroom window over the
That's kind
street.
of fun. I would like to live there.
But it's not fun because it's gross and really dark.
Why is it gross?
Like because there's poop everywhere because it's 1666. And
Ah, the
there's
poop
like
everywhere.
so because there's poop everywhere. And there's also like so there's no there's no sewer system. There's no way to get the poop out. The poop everywhere. It smells bad, obviously. History smells terrible. And it's really, really crowded and there's no fresh air, because there's no fresh air. You can barely see the sky when you're on the street in the middle of the day.
Yeah, it's not great. I
Yeah.
always wonder how people back then were intimate because, like, it sounds disgusting. Like, it is.
I feel like you'd have a UTI constantly. It'd be so gross.
Yeah, yeah. I don't like. Yeah, it's all bad.
Yeah, no, totally. No one was taking showers. I mean, that's not part of the story, but yeah, but it was like very crowded in most of the city. So the houses are getting closer and closer. They're all made of wood. It's also the summer of 1666 was very, very dry. It was like the driest summer on record, so everything is dry in this whole city. And then also it's really windy. So on this is the beginning of September 1666. On September 1st, the king's brother is in the Anglo-Dutch War off at sea, and he's going to get into a battle like with the Dutch, and it's so windy, they both sides just leave. They can't even fight. Like they're just like it was just so windy, like the boats were going crazy, like all this huge storm on the sea. So that wind from September 1st is moving towards London and it gets there around 1 a.m. on September 2nd, 1666.
Got it.
Got it? So the fire began in the middle of the night, um, and it ravaged the city for like 4 to 5 days. It started in a bakery owned by a man named Thomas Fariner on Pudding Lane, which is adorable. It's where all the bakers were.
Oh my God, that's
Uh,
so cute.
I know. And it was probably someone forgetting to put out the fire, which happened all the time. So this is like the Swiss cheese model that we talk about of like
Hmm?
things that have to go wrong. So like it's really fucking dry. This wind is like a huge wind that they haven't seen in a really long time. And someone in the bakery forgets to turn off the oven.
Yeah.
And so there starts to be the fire starts in the bakery of Thomas's house. And so he obviously lives on the top floor. And so him and his family go to the top floor and they escape to their neighbor's house via that top window that's really close to each other.
Aw,
But their maid is afraid of heights and she won't go. And she's the first person to die in the Great Fire of London, which is very
that's
sad.
sad.
Yeah. So right now, the thing to do would have been to grab the hooks and pull down the houses around the bakery. Like that would be the answer, and then it would stop burning. And they do that all the time in London. There's fires all the time, you know?
Are houses that flimsily built that you could just poke it with a stick?
Well, they're like, I think so. It's like wood. I don't think they're poking it with a stick. I think you're like hooking it onto the top and like pulling it down with a group of people, I think.
Okay. Because when I
Yeah.
was in
And each,
Ireland, I was like amazed at like the build quality of things. Everything there was like 7,000 years old, and you look at it and it's like still standing, and it looks impenetrable. So I guess you have to like weaken it and like structurally before you can do any of that stuff.
yeah, I'm sure there's like other things that they did, but like, yeah, the hook was to pull it down. And that was like you said earlier, that's like the way to stop the fire is to stop, give it nowhere to go.
Yeah.
And that way you can stop it. And we did that all the time. But the problem is that in this part of London and in most of London, most of the houses were rentals. So the person who owned the house didn't live in it. They rented it to someone else. So when the Lord Mayor, Sir Thomas Bloodworth, who was the guy in charge of London, he was called to make a decision, and he said, "It's not that bad. Just let it burn out. Don't tear down any of the houses because we can't find the owners because the owners aren't physically there. It's just people who are renting the houses. So to save the properties, allegedly, he's like, let's just leave it. And he goes back to bed. It's like 1 in the morning, he leaves. And so everybody else is just like watching this fire happen and they can't do anything about it because they're not allowed to tear down the houses that they would usually do. So the city did have some fire breaks, which were like places where there was that space between it, but they weren't enough to contain this fire. There was also a shit ton of flammable stuff in the city. They had just they're coming in and out of wars all the time, so there's like storehouses of gunpowder all over, and things that are like primed to explode in different places.
Not good.
No. So there's also a lot of like books and papers and things that are like really highly flammable. Everything's made out of wood. We know a lot about it this from a man named Samuel Pepys. He was a nobleman who knew the king, and he wrote a journal. And so his journals you can like read now. It goes like his day to day. And he watched it happen from across the Thames, and he was like, why aren't they pulling things down? Like, this is getting bigger and bigger. I can see this happening. So he went to the king because he knew the king, and he told the king, you have to start tearing these buildings down. And the king said yes, and like overrode the mayor. So they were finally able to start pulling things down. Um, your question?
Are we just gonna like gloss over the fact that the mayor of London's name was Bloodworth?
That's a pretty cool name.
Like it sounds like he brushes his teeth with battle axes.
I know. I think actually he's kind of lame, unfortunately. So he doesn't live up to his name because he could have like been a hero, and he definitely is not the hero in this story.
You're looking out for like a few landowners instead of like the
Yeah,
entire city, which is his
yeah,
job.
yeah, 100%. So people start fleeing because like this part of the city is very obviously on fire. The official death toll of the Great Fire of London is six, which I do not believe. There's no way that only six people died.
Yeah, because
Um,
they're not counting orphans, maids,
exactly.
like
Yeah. Yeah, they're not counting the poor people. And they couldn't count the poor people. They didn't have a list. You know what I mean? Like I feel like they probably had like a rudimentary list of people for tax purposes, but like there's no way only six people died because people also start to like they could potentially have been cremated because this fire in the center was so hot. And there's like a piece of pottery that was found like in the center of it like year like later by like archaeologists, and like that piece is was heated up to like 2000 degrees, like crazy people could have just disappeared, you know and I'm sure they did because so and people would do things like they would move their things a mile away. So I'd be like, I'm gonna bring my stuff over to your house, Fars, and then the fire would get to your house, and we'd be like, shit, and we'd like move our stuff again. So people were like moving their things, and they were really focused on like saving their property and their physical things rather than putting out the fire, like a lot of people were. So there were also then carts and boats that were upping their prices to bring people out of the city. So like being like, where it usually would cost like, you know, 30 bucks for an Uber. Now it's $6,000 adjusted to our time. So like
jeez.
people are really taking advantage of other people. And there's a big jam at all the gates of the city because some carts are trying to get in on this good deal, and everyone else is trying to get out. So there's a lot of like that where I'm sure people died in that like melee, like
Yeah, of
people are
course.
panicking and then getting out. Um, and of course also there was looting. People were like, stealing stuff from houses, like as they burned down. There's also, I'm sure, a ton of human stuff like assaults and panic and like things that, no one wrote down because they died. So I'm sure there's like a lot more people that died. Um, at one point, all of the booksellers moved their books to the crypt in St. Paul's Cathedral because it was made of stone. And they were like, we'll move all of our books into this crypt so that they'll be safe. But the ceiling, the roof was wood, and the wooden roof caught on fire, collapsed into the cathedral, into the crypt, and all the books went on fire. So it was just like a fireball of all the paper.
Yeah.
So all that's happening. The Royal Exchange is gone. That's like the bank. And then, of course, people start to be like, what happened? How did this happen? Whose fault is this? And of course, they start blaming,
Bloodworth.
yes, no, immigrants.
Oh, of course they're not gonna blame Bloodworth. They're gonna name
No,
Giuseppe.
so they are like in the middle of it, which I totally understand because I have been in the middle of a terrorist attack and you don't know what's going on?
Yeah.
And but people were like, is this a terrorist attack? They had actually just burned some Dutch cities. So they're like, is this revenge for the cities that we just burned during this war that we're in? Um, it like sparked a huge, obviously, like fear of the other. They were saying that like the baker where it started, he was Dutch. He wasn't, but that rumor started like immediately. They were blaming other people. And then another thing that would happen is like obviously it's still super, super windy. So sparks and ash and stuff would fly to different parts of the city. So you see fires starting all over the city in different places. And it looks like potentially there could be like an arsonist, like someone bombing different parts of the city, and that's really fucking scary. The people start thinking that that's happening.
I love that back then it was the terrorist angle was just like they're a slightly different version of like
Of white.
white than we are. Like
Hmm. Hmm.
like Like, what is the actual difference that you guys are fighting over?
Oh my
Dutch
God.
and the British both have terrible food, terrible climates. Like, what is it?
Selfish. And also like also Catholics, it could have been Catholics who were doing it. At this point they hate Catholics, but that goes back and forth, over and over again. But all of that is happening, and this is like a huge thing. Um, Also, everyone is really tired. It's been like 3 days. You can't take a nap in the middle of this, you know? So like they're not making good decisions. They're not prioritizing getting rid of the fire. Eventually, Bloodworth is like, you know what? I'm gonna go take a nap. I'll be back, and he just leaves, and they don't see him until after it's over.
Yeah, good. So would I. I'd be like, fuck this, I'm out.
He just like
Like,
he funked
you,
out of there.
you can have this city, which is now basically just an ash pile.
Exactly. The king actually, he rode around on his horse giving people money to get people out, which is noble, right? I feel like
That's pretty cool.
it's pretty cool. So he was like, those people who were like jacking up their prices, he was like, fine, I'll pay you, just get these people out of here. So they were trying to get people out. But eventually the fire did stop, and it stopped because the wind dropped. The wind dropped, and they used gunpowder that was stored in the Tower of London to create those huge fire breaks. They had to demolish a lot of like not the outside of it so that it would stop. So eventually, after like 5 days, it did stop. After it was over, it destroyed, like I said, 5/6 of the city, approximately 87 churches, 13,200 houses, a bunch of other buildings, and so London had, like 400,000 people potentially like, kind of going in and out of it and around the whole city. But in it ended up with being about 70,000 people left homeless and having to go into like refugee camps around the city, which is way too many houses to burn down for only 6 people to have died.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it probably there's a bunch of people that probably killed each other in the refugee camps
Exactly.
as you would do.
There's so much of that going on that we just like don't know about. So that people really like wanted to blame something, they were like, whose fault is this? There's all of the things that, it was chance, but it being chance is really scary. And that's, I think, again, what we talk about with the Swiss cheese model, like it's just fucking chance that all these things went wrong, you know?
Yeah.
So they were like, is this the apocalypse? We just had a plague. We're in these wars. We had a drought. Like what like, is this are we being punished for something? So people were trying to find like if is God punishing us? Is it something I did? Is it something we did as a people? Should we stop being in these wars? Should we stop doing all these things? So people were really like obviously everyone was really, really, really traumatized and they didn't do anything about it. There's no like mental health care. But like Samuel Pepys, the guy who wrote the journal about it, him and his wife, like they didn't sleep for years. They would wake up with like terrifying nightmares. And I'm sure he just wrote it down. I'm sure so many people had that, because they never talk about PTSD.
I mean,
You know?
it is terrifying. I accidentally set fire to my house. Like, I didn't know what was happening. I basically put something on the stove and forgot about it. And
Mhm.
then I caught the reflection of like flames. Like, not
Oh,
just
that's so
like a,
scary.
it's so different. Like, a candle wick versus like a fire is just
Yeah.
so, I mean, your body goes into, I got to do something, anything. It has to be, it is terrifying. I mean, again, like I was in that experience. I literally picked up hot oil with my bare, like flaming oil with my bare hands to get rid of the fire because I was like that scared. And like my hands
Yeah.
were burned to a crisp for like weeks and weeks after that. But
Oh my God, that's so
yeah,
scary. Yeah, and
yeah,
then like that times a million. Like imagine just like watching Austin burn down. You're like, what am I supposed
yeah.
to do now?
I would also leave town. Like,
Yeah,
like,
totally.
don't be people. Do not be a hero. Take it from me. I'm telling you, never try to be the hero. Always escape.
Oh, we've talked about
Just
that so many times. Yeah, just run.
like curl into a
Get the fuck
ball,
out of there.
throw the vulnerable at the problem, and then get out of the situation.
Well, don't do that, but you should run. Um, there's a man named Robert Hubert who is, how we also talked about how people always confess to crimes that they didn't do,
Yeah,
like just to like for attention. So Robert Hubert was a man, he was Dutch. He said that he did it, that he started it, and he like went to the baker's, like where the baker's bakery was, and he was like, I did it here. And the baker signed off on that guy's execution, and he was executed for it. But he didn't do it. It was an
yeah.
accident. you
Doesn't
know.
have it. If he just wants peace, let him go to hell.
And he wanted it. He's in the history book, so you know. Um, after the fire, they wanted to rebuild obviously as fast as possible. There's an architect, Sir Christopher Wren. He oversaw the rebuilding. He wanted a lot of things to be built out of stone instead of wood, obviously, that helped prevent future large-scale fires. He actually had a new plan, and like immediately people had new plans. Like even while it was burning down, people were going to the king with like a new plan for the city. Like they were already people wanted to be the architect of the new London, even as it was still burning. Um, Christopher Wren had a plan to rebuild it like a little bit more, like have more wider streets, like boulevards, things like that. But people just wanted to get back to their life, so they just rebuilt on their old plots. And a lot of the way London is now is the way that it was then. Like they like kept the small lanes and all of that. Wren did redo St. Paul's Cathedral, which is beautiful, and that is still there. And then in when they were building Washington, D.C., they used Wren's plans. So Washington, D.C. is what he had thought London should be like those like big boulevards and like streets and stuff.
Cool.
Um, Also, London gets destroyed again during World War II. So it's not a
It's a pretty
forever
big
plan.
target.
Yeah. It's always getting destroyed. Today there is a monument. It is a big pillar in the middle of London to as a monument to the fire. It used to say on it, um, burning of this Protestant city began and carried out by the treachery and the malice of the Popish faction, meaning the Catholics did it. That used to say that on the monument, but they chiseled it out in the 1800s because then England went
They
back to
had
being
no
Catholic.
because they had no proof.
Yeah, and they
They
obviously was
had.
not the Catholics who did it.
It's probably the bigger thing is there was no proof that that happened.
Yeah. So that's been chilled out, but the monument is still there. And London is basically, built on the same roads and alleys and plan that it was before then. They just rebuilt on top of it and they rebuilt it pretty fast. Within like 4 years, it was like up and running again. But it was obviously a devastating fire, and that I'm sure a lot more people than six died, and most of London was completely flattened.
So I have two thoughts.
Okay,
I forgot the first one already.
perfect.
So I have one thought. Let me get to it before I forget. So your story reminded me when you kept talking about chance, how that's kind of how every major thing happens is this
Yeah.
convergence of issues. It reminded me of something I was reading about the Fukushima nuclear plant because
Hmm.
as part of designing these things and part of like figuring out like how to like mitigation against disaster, they look at actuaries who put together
Hmm.
probability tables and
Hmm.
like in Fukushima's example, like basically for that to have happened, it would have to have a convergence of events that would not be projected to happen over 10,000 years or whatever it was because
Yeah.
it would have to have a this magnitude earthquake that would trigger this kind of a tsunami at this depth to trigger
Hmm.
this large of a wave at this speed. Like
Hmm.
all that had to kind of come together, and they're like, guys, this is 10,000 year problem. This is not a today problem. Like let's just move on with building this nuclear power plant. And the same story
Hmm.
here. It's like it had all these things that were kind of improbable to happen and kind of come together, ended up coming together. And I remember the second thing. The second thing was I was reading while you were talking that Bloodworth, if he were to tell them to tear those houses down, he would have been personally liable to the owners for repaying to
Hmm.
rebuild those houses, unless he got the instruction from the king to tear them down. So he
He
might not
finally
have been a
did,
villain.
but he didn't go to the king and ask. He went back to sleep.
Oh, well,
Samuel
there you
Pepys
go.
had to go to the king and ask. So someone else had to go to the king, tell the king this has to be taken down, and then he took them down. But also then like, what is his job if he can't do it anyway?
All right, Bloodworth, I was trying to stick up for you, but you kind of fucked it up there.
Yeah, I don't know. That's nice of you, but I don't think so. I think he's still a
Uh,
villain.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Wild times.
cool. Yeah.
Wild times in old Mary London, which
Hmm.
I've flown through Gatwick and Heathrow, but I've actually never explored London.
It's great. I went there for 2 weeks in grad school. I lived there. I lived in a hotel and I took some classes, and it was really fun. Oh my God, we had such a good time. And my sister, my brother, and I went there one time as well. It's great. It's very lovely.
Yeah, that'll go on the list.
Yeah.
Sweet Taylor. Well, thank you for sharing. Is there anything we want to talk through?
I have one more listener mail from my friend Agnes, and she said what she remembers from seventh grade science about the ozone layer, because we talked about that, remember?
Yeah.
Um, it was the CFCs, the chlorofluorocarbons that were in aerosols and in styrofoam plates and things. Like, are you old enough to remember when like McDonald's everything was wrapped in styrofoam?
Yes.
It was like particularly bad styrofoam, and then that was stuff that was in the aerosols. So once they took that out and made the aerosols work differently, the ozone layer kind of fixed itself, and it's almost back to normal,
Good.
which
So
is very
styrofoam
interesting.
was the problem mostly.
Mostly the aerosols, which is so funny because
Aerosols.
you're like, is people like making their hair really big in the 80s,
Right.
which
Right.
I love. But that could potentially be the thing that ends us. Why the fuck not?
Why not?
You know?
Interesting. Okay. Well, thanks for writing in.
Yeah, thanks, Agnes. And anyone else, any thoughts or ideas that you have, any alternate theories on what caused the Great Fire of London, any great fires you want to hear about, let me know. We're gonna do a bunch of disasters this year. I'm super excited about. I have 2 weeks off of work at the moment, so I'm gonna just be painting my house and reading books in my ears and hopefully getting a couple weeks prepped. So I'm excited to do that.
That is fun. That is
Yeah,
fun. I'm
yeah.
excited for you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, we are kicking off 2024 with a bang or a fire, and we'll see where the rest of the year takes us. You know what I was thinking, Taylor? I was just reflecting on the fact like so much crazy stuff happened this year, or I
Hmm.
guess last year, 2023. I was thinking about the Titan sub, and I was like, you know, at the start of the year, nobody even knew what this was, I remember thinking to myself like, wait, you can just pay money to go down to the Titanic. Like
I know.
it was the whole thing was so new and now it's just like accepted fact. I'm like, what is gonna happen next year? Like
That's so
what's
true.
coming?
What crazy shit are we in for? Yeah, you're right. Fingers crossed that it's not the end of the world. Hopefully Yellowstone doesn't erupt, but shit, who knows? What kind of Have you seen the videos this week of all the waves in California going like over the piers?
No.
I've seen like a bunch of videos. I don't know how prevalent it is, but of like people standing on the like different piers like next to the ocean and the waves are just like coming up and they have to like run from them.
That's shocking because the piers, like I'm thinking about like the Santa Monica or Malibu or Santa Barbara, like those piers are huge. Like they're like
Yeah, it's not those. It's like the smaller, I don't know, but let me look this up. California waves. So, something's coming, probably. Yeah, what crazy thing is it going to be when it's like, yeah, we could never have predicted that more monster waves will collide with California coasts. Yeah, massive dangerous waves hit California coast this week.
20 foot tall, some as high as 25 feet, with expectations being some as high as 40 are going to impact the area. As high as a telephone pole, which, yeah, I mean, that's as tall
No,
as those piers are in Malibu.
yeah, that's real scary. I always am nervous about those beautiful beach houses. I'm like, I don't know. You're so close to the ocean, it can kill you in a minute.
It's worth it.
Yeah.
Doing a heartbeat. Sweet. Well, if you have any predictions for next year, what the
Yeah.
crazy news is, I'm gonna play a bit of bingo and say, I don't know. It's so predictable, right? Like it's a hurricane, fires, like it happens every year. Like I don't know. There's no bingo to be
This
played.
this also reminded me of like one of the saddest things is listening to podcasts from early, like the end of October, 20, what was it, 2016 when Trump was first elected? Because everyone's like really excited and then like the next one they're like sad. Like it's like some of the ones I listen to, that they're like, woohoo, and then they're like, so how's it going?
Yeah, it's gonna be a wild one.
Can't wait.
I do want to shout out Hero of the Week. I'm gonna do this.
Sure.
I'm gonna add this segment. Hero of the Week, Gypsy Rose, released from prison. Thank God. I have no idea why she was
Oh
ever even
yeah.
sent to prison. Like, we should all just give her like a GoFundMe account and just every month deposit money into her GoFundMe because I can't like I was just reading about how one of the surgeries I totally forgot about was her having her salivation glands removed. So
Oh,
she,
that's
she
crazy.
literally can't salivate. Like crazy. The
That must
abuse
have
she
fucking was.
suffered is like unbelievable, and
I'm
we threw her
really
in prison for it.
no, I'm happy I'm happy for her. And I think she's on social media now. Like, good for her for
Good for
getting
her.
out. Yeah.
If you want to talk to us, Gypsy, give us a shout. We'll do an
For
interview.
real.
In the matter
You
of the
can
people of
definitely
the
be on
state
the
of
show.
California
You'll
That would
definitely be on the
versus
show.
Orenthal James
change our
Simpson,
lives.
case number
So
It would
BA
absolutely be
uh,
life
09.
changing.
Fellow Americans,
Awesome.
thanks,
Cool. Anything
Mars.
else,
ask
Taylor?
not
That's it. Follow
what
us
your
on
country can do
Instagram,
for you,
etc. at Doomed to Fail Pod. We
ask
have an
what
And
email
you
we're
can
back.
list, so
do
every
for
week
your
I
Welcome
put
back,
out,
Taylor.
I email you what
Welcome
we
back,
put out. You
Mars.
can sign up for
In
that.
this
We
chilly,
are like
chilly,
Linktree.
cold
It's on
Wednesday
Substack,
in Oakland.
and send us a note if
It's
you
true.
haven't
No,
been
it shouldn't be
getting.
too bad.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks all. I'm
Taylor.
pretty. So wait. So how long are you there for? A day?
Just today. Yeah, like
That's
one
quick.
night.
Quick
Yeah.
little turnaround.
Um, yeah, it's on my list of things of like I have like so many like cities on my weather app. I'm looking at it now because like everywhere everyone I know lives. Oh my God. My brother lives in Spokane. It's 7 right now. We got Baltimore snowing, Austin 25, wind chill advisory, and 3 more advisories.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hard
It's gonna
freeze.
be. It's
Oh, but
gonna
then
be
on
a
Thursday it's
rough
gonna be 67
60. Wait, where?
in Austin.
Wait, when?
Thursday.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. Yeah, I'll take
Yeah,
it.
so you're gonna get through it.
All right. So it's only a few days. We got to bunker down.
Yeah.
Good.
Good. Great.
So we are on to your story today, and per usual, I'm gonna go ahead and do an introduction. We're doomed to fail. We are gonna have a fun podcast today about a topic that I'm gonna guess that Taylor's giving me clues for, which I don't know because we don't share each other's details before we record the podcast. I'll stop talking like that. Can you give me a clue?
It's a continuation of a series that I guess I started earlier this year.
Volcanoes.
No, we finished Volcanoes. We're done. We printed out that diploma.
Oh yeah, that's right. And we released the omnibus.
Yeah. Yeah.
The continuation of something you started. I don't know.
The fire.
Oh, wait, the fire?
Yeah, it's a fire.
Okay, sweet. Which fire?
The one in Chicago.
The Great Chicago
Chicago.
Fire.
The Great Chicago Fire. Yes, I also want to say, so we're going to talk about the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. And I also wanted to say Chicago, like that, like Chicago. And Lindsay, my cousin Lindsay, that's what your mom sounds like. Lindsay's mom is like, I'm from Chicago. It's great. She's the best.
I love it.
Um,
I love that. I
yeah,
love Midwestern accent.
me too. They're so cute. So yeah, the Great Chicago Fire. We talked about the Great Fire of London in 1666. So let's talk about the Great Chicago Fire. My friend Agnes emailed and was like, "You're gonna do that, right?" And I'm like, "Yes." Like, obviously, I grew up in Chicago, so my Chicago friends were like, "Let's do it." So okay, you ready?
I'm in. Let's do it.
Did you ever read The Jungle when you were in school, Fars, by Upton Sinclair?
You're going to be shocked to know that I did not, but I am
Okay,
very, very familiar with it.
what are you familiar with about it?
The horrid meat,
Yeah, but you know what it is actually was supposed to be about
the Chicago
was
Fire.
no, about the people. Like it wasn't written to be a think piece about how gross the meat packing industry was, but that just happened to be something that they brought up and people took that. But it was really about the people. And I read it and I I know that it was about, he mentions how disgusting all of the meat plants were. It actually led to the U.S. Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906. So it actually had like impact across the country, which is great. That should be safe and clean. But it's also a story about people, and it's so devastating. So it's all these immigrants coming to Chicago, and they're having like such a hard time finding a place to live, finding a place to work. They're getting screwed over everywhere. Like their houses is gets mortgaged if they miss a payment, or even if they don't miss a payment, someone else can move in. They just like have terrible employment. There's one time where a terrible thing happens where a baby falls into a puddle and dies. So sad. There's like so many human stories in it too. One of them about like the guy meets a rich person in Chicago and the rich person gives him $100 bill, but get anyone to make change on it, and he's afraid he like ends up losing it. It's just like so devastating. It's such a devastating human story. But I had that in my mind when I was thinking about this because Chicago is such a rapidly growing city in this time, and it is one of the biggest cities in America, even a couple of years later. So the Chicago Fire is also the name of their soccer team. Isn't that funny and
Bad.
weird?
It's bad. Bad
Yeah.
PR.
And a TV show, obviously, Chicago Fire, the like a drama show. Okay, I know I mentioned Tacoma FD a bunch on our socials because I just love that show so much and I'm thinking about fires. But they always make fun of other shows. And at one point they're watching a show that it's like Pittsburgh FD is in or Pitt, yeah, Pittsburgh FD is the name of the show, but then they're filming it in Seattle and it's Pittsburgh FD Seattle. Which like makes you laugh so hard. Like it's not like Seattle FD, it's Pittsburgh FD Seattle. You know what I mean? So Chicago is a huge city now. It was a huge city then. So it's 1871, and Chicago has been growing like crazy. In 1840, the population of Chicago was 4,470. In 1870, so just 30 years later, it's almost 300,000. So it's gone from like 5,000 people to 300,000 people in 30 years. So it's huge. By 1880, so after the fire, it's still going to grow. It's going to be 500,000 people. So it's still going to grow kind of forever. It's obviously a great connector city. There's tons of trains now and then, and it's cold as shit, but it's beautiful, and a lot of people live there. So, do you remember where the Great Chicago Fire started?
In a bakery.
Nope, that was the other one.
Then I do
Um,
not know.
it started in Mrs. O'Leary's barn. That's like the
Oh,
myth that like the cow kicked over the lantern, and that started the Great Chicago Fire. So there's a song that was released in 1896 called There'll Be a Hot Time in the Old Town Tonight. And it goes, late one night when we were all in bed, old Mother Leary left a lantern in the shed. And when the cow kicked it over, she winked her eye and said, There'll be a hot time in the old town tonight. But she wasn't old, she was only 44. But still, it
I mean,
did
back
start.
then,
Yeah. It did start in and around their barn in Chicago. They live like a little bit. They live on the southern side of the city. So Catherine and Patrick O'Leary were immigrants from Ireland. They moved to Chicago and they had a couple of side hustles. So when they talk about Patrick O'Leary in the book I read a book called The Great Chicago Fire and listened to some podcasts that I'll share. But they always call Patrick O'Leary an unskilled laborer, like an unskilled worker. Like those are the jobs that he had. And I'm like, how learn a skill? What? How can he be unskilled forever? But whatever. That he just had like shit jobs the whole time. And Mrs. O'Leary had a cow and some other animals, and she would deliver milk to her neighbors. So she had a barn where she had some animals, and she was like a milk lady. They owned their home, the barn, and a house on their property that they rented out to other Irish immigrants. So they were like working poor. So here are the facts. It's Sunday, October 7th, 1871. The O'Learys live at 137 West DeCoven Street. It was dry as fuck. It was the hottest October on record and the driest summer they'd ever had, which is exactly what happened in London, if you remember. Super dry. And it was still warm. Everything was made of wood, obviously, because everything was still made of wood then. There was a strong wind, exactly what happened in London. And Mrs. O'Leary had just gotten 2 tons of hay delivered to her barn. So the barn's full of dry hay.
kindling.
Yeah, exactly. The people in the back house are having a party. They're probably smoking cigarettes, whatever. They have candles, like all is happening kind of on the property. The week has been very, very fiery. So it is, 200 years after the Great Fire of London, but fire trucks are, still very similar. They don't have like it's still kind of the same way that they're going to try to fight this fire. And there's so many fires still because people still rely on fire so much. So, like I said before, we're super lucky that we don't have to rely on fire constantly. But the firefighters are exhausted. So the day before, there was a fire at a lumber yard that caught on fire, and guess what it was next to that caught on fire after?
A cotton factory.
It's like it's so ridiculous that you couldn't make it up. It's a cardboard box factory.
Not good.
It sounds like it happened in a cartoon, you know, like, oh, my cardboard box factory is on fire now, you know?
That was literally a Simpsons episode.
Yeah. So sometime in the evening, around 8 o'clock, the O'Leary barn caught fire. A neighbor, his name was Daniel O'Sullivan. He was 26. He only had one leg. He had a wooden leg, which would make me even more afraid of fire than I think. I don't know. That seems scary. But he like kind of like hobbled over, started yelling. Everybody's like, "Holy shit, there's a fire!" They try to get it out. They try to get the animals out. They get one calf out, but the cow dies and the horses die, and the carriage that they have is destroyed. The O'Learys were in bed when it happened. So one of the myths is like the cow kicked over the lantern while she was milking the cow, but she was like, "Why would I ever be milking my cow in the middle of the night? That doesn't make any sense." Like she was asleep and she had to wake up really early to milk the cow. So however it happened, fire got into the barn and the barn like it was engulfed in flames really, really quickly. It could have been the people at the fire or at the party or people from, an ember from the wind just like blowing around and like catching the barn on fire. What is kind of fun is that their house did not burn down. So like the whole city of Chicago pretty much burnt down, but in the other direction.
That was
So
very
Larry's
lucky.
house was still there. Yeah. So now the fire's starting to get crazy, and they're like, okay, we need to tell someone, we need to alert someone. And so we talked about last time that there were like brigades and volunteers and watchmen. So this time, there's a little bit more technology. So there's watchmen in towers around the city watching for fires. And also, local businessmen and business owners have keys to a call box that they can call the fire station. So, like, if you own the store on the block, you're going to have the key to open up the box to call the fire department. Like you're the only one who has it, but like it exists to be able to do that. So Daniel O'Sullivan went to like a local store and tried to get the guy to call, and the guy didn't do it. He said, "No, I'm not going to call. It's not a big deal. The firemen are really tired." So he like didn't make the call. But finally, someone did see it. A dude named Matthias Schaefer was on one of the towers, and he saw it, and he sent the fire trucks to the wrong place because he couldn't really tell where it was from where he was. So they ended up going about a mile away. So it took them a while to get to where the fire was. Make sense?
Yeah. Oh, these are horse-drawn fire trucks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm. And so, have you ever heard the term like a three-alarm fire?
Yeah, I heard it in the context of chili.
Do you know what that means? Oh, like spicy food, like three-alarm chili.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I would assume it's based on the severity of something.
It is, yeah, and it's based on literally ringing a bell. So if you saw a fire, you'd ring it once if it wasn't that big of a deal, twice if it was getting pretty bad, and three times if it was really bad. So a three
Just
alarm
ring it
fire
three
would
times. Just always ring it three times. Like,
100%. I totally agree. But they didn't ring it three times from the beginning for this one because they didn't think it was like that big of a deal because there were fires all of the time. So by the time the firemen get there, it's about 10 o'clock. So about 2 hours have gone by and it's already spreading a ton. Also, obviously because of the like crazy, everything's dry and it's really windy. So it's already starting to spread. So a couple things that happen in Chicago that are kind of sad and I thought interesting kind of side notes is one of them is this is only 6 years after Lincoln was assassinated. And one thing that I know about him is that he left Springfield the day like that he was going to DC to become president. And he was like, I love Illinois. I can't wait to come back. And he never went back. Like it wasn't easy to travel, obviously. And like Lincoln had planned after he was done with his second term to go back to Illinois to check out the West, maybe go to Europe. He never really went anywhere, you know?
kind
He
of
just like
sad.
he was poor and then he was president. So sad. And so he, he had all those plans. He's been dead for 6 years. But you know who was in Chicago during the Great Chicago Fire? You gotta
John
guess.
Wilkes Booth.
No, I don't know where he was, but Mary Todd Lincoln, that poor fucking woman, his wife.
Oh, jeez.
She had just lost, they had four sons. Three of them died. Two of them died in childhood. One died while they were in the White House. Her third son, Tad, had died just a couple days before. Or a couple months before. So she was like mourning her third son. He died when he was 18 and just like so sad. And then of course she's there during this like panic. Like she was fine. She wasn't affected, but like mentally, I'm sure she's like, why, what the fuck? Why do I deserve this?
Yeah,
Super
yeah.
crazy. And also a lot of people in Chicago were people who knew Lincoln really well. Like they knew him as a person and they were like lawyers with him on the circuit and like he was big in Illinois. So the fire also destroyed a lot of personal papers of Lincoln's, of letters, of like historical things that would have been really cool to have, but the fire destroyed them, which is a bummer.
That sucks.
Another thing that happened on the same day is actually the deadliest fire in American history happened in Wisconsin. It's the Peshtigo fire, Peshtigo. That one killed 2,400 people. And that's the deadliest fire in American history. And it happened the exact same day as the Chicago fire. It started with a slash and burn, kind of getting out of control because they're trying to control fire and ended up destroying a city and killing a ton of people. But it's the same wind and the same dry climate. So like it makes sense that other fires happened this day as well, you know?
Wait, where is it? What state?
In Wisconsin, in
Hmm.
Peshtigo, Wisconsin,
Okay. Not
like a little
good.
bit north. Yeah. So here's what happens in Chicago. The rich people are, of course, running away with their most expensive things. So they're trying to get away. A lot of like paintings and books and things are destroyed. Some of them bury things in their yard. One guy buried an entire piano in his yard, just like hoping for the best. So they would like bury their silver, bury their jewels, and then like run. Hopefully that would save it. I don't know exactly what happened to all the stuff that was buried, but one person said that when he came back, it was still so hot for like a really long time that he tried to dig up his stuff, and as soon as his stuff hit the oxygen, it burst into flames. 'Cause that's how hot it
God.
was, you know? So like a lot of it is like they couldn't even go back into the city for like at least a week because it was just like so hot. So a bunch of people try to bring their things to the Chicago Historical Society, but they're like, it's too crowded in here. We have too much stuff. So they're like closing the doors and don't let people bring their things to that. The rich people were also being saved by their friends. So they could like, walk to a different part of town and stay with friends. At some point, there are rich neighborhoods that think that they're not going to get the fire. They think that they're safe. And one man says, like, his family's packing. And he's like, don't pack. We're safe. He's like, let's make breakfast for as many people as we can make breakfast for because we know people are going to be hungry in the morning. And so, like, the servants were like panically cooking, but they ended up getting consumed by the fire anyway. Like, they lost their house too. It happened so fast. Um, Another thing that rich people could do is they could leave. So now I never have cash. I use my credit card all the time. I can use it all over the world. But in this time, what you would do is if I had, a house in like a lake town in Chicago, I would have a bank account there, you know?
Okay.
And that bank would have money in it. So they could go and like get money out of the bank in other parts of like around like Michigan. So people were able to do that. The poor people, of course, were just running with their stuff. Some people after it was over said that the poor were better off because they had less to lose. And you're like, no, that,
That's not how that works.
that's not how that works. No. Um, they ended up in refugee camps. People got smallpox. Like it's very sad. Like, it was very, if you lost everything, you lost everything. There are reports of, obviously, this is something that like I was reading this right after the London fire, and in the London fire, how they were like, oh, only like 6 people died. But in the Chicago fire, like people remember hearing like mothers crying because they can't find their children. Like, of course that happened in London.
Yeah.
Like, of course that happened in all these ancient fires. Carts were being filled and toppled over. Of course, there was looting. Like one guy was running and he saw a guy wearing his clothes because the guy had like looted his house and he was like, fuck it, better than have it burned. Let's go.
Yeah.
So people ran all the way to Lake Michigan. So Lake Michigan is cold even when it's hot. Have you ever been in Lake Michigan?
I've never been in it, but I've been around it enough to be like, that is a terrifyingly huge body of water. Like
Yes.
it has the same gravitas of an ocean.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's freezing. It's freezing all year long. But people were running to Lake Michigan and they ran waist deep into the water. Just like remember this year in Hawaii when people were running into the ocean?
Yeah.
It was just like that. And it was loud. The fire was like roaring and people were running and like standing in the ocean. Some standing in the ocean, stood in the ocean for hours. And it was like freezing and they were just like watching the city burn with like fire flying above them. The jail was, everybody in jail was let go. The mayor wrote a note and it said, release all prisoners from jail at once, keeping them in custody if possible. And like they let everybody go for like petty crimes immediately. And then they took the rest of them like with them and almost all of them just got away and just were like
Yeah.
in the wind. But they're like, we're not gonna let you burn to death here. So
Yeah, of
just
course.
just go. Um, and so they had hoped that the fire would be stopped by the rivers because there's tons of rivers in Chicago, but they weren't. And it was because of the wind. And the shoreline, of course, had all the lumber yards and things like that because they needed to have access to the boats and all the things. So the shoreline was very, very combustible.
Wait,
So,
so I'm looking at this map
mhm,
and it looks like the fire would have jumped two rivers.
yes, it did.
And you're saying the reason I was going to ask about that. You're saying the reason that happened was because there were lumber boats there?
Yes. Not
Okay.
like yeah, like lumber yards are on the shores of the rivers, and then it's so windy. Like the wind like just blows like embers and burning things across the river. So where they thought they might be able to stop it, it was not able to. So I was actually around well, the first river that it jumped was around midnight. So around midnight, the flaming debris blew across the river and landed on the roof of the South Side Gas Works. So that like exploded, you know,
Yeah.
and that caused it to continue to spread out to the south side. The mayor was Roswell B. Mason. It was his only term as mayor, but he did a bunch of calls for other cities to help, and they did. Other cities sent their fire trucks. They were able to like get the word out, but it didn't really help. They were connecting to the waterworks. So there was like a general waterworks that they could connect to, but the water, it was so hot, the water would just turn to steam when it came out of the hoses. It just like didn't do anything. So because of the wind, there were also fire whirls, like tornadoes of fire going through the city. And that ended up hitting the roof of the waterworks. So the waterworks caught on fire and all of the pumps went dry. So at some point, a little bit after midnight, they couldn't even pretend to use their hoses for water anymore. It didn't work.
This map is also really interesting because it shows where the fire started. It literally
Hmm.
just consumed everything above it.
Yeah, yeah.
Like
And
no,
so
everything below it is like totally fine.
it's fine, including the O'Leary's house. Um, so after seeing the damage, the fire marshal, after the waterworks exploded and was gone, the fire marshal said, I gave up all hopes of being able to save much of anything. They really couldn't do anything. A couple people did try to do those like fire breaks, and one of them, a man named James Hildreth, was an alderman who had the idea to blow up buildings with gunpowder to try to stop it and create those like
Yeah.
fire breaks. Um, he did a couple. I don't think it was ever like super successful. He got into an argument with a Civil War hero named Philip Sheridan, and who was chopping buildings down with axes. And so they kind of like there's a little bit of back and forth. Like, I want to be in charge of doing this. I want to be in charge of doing this. And so there, it doesn't. No one really was able to make that fire break. Um, it moved north across the lake. There was a big like melee on the Randolph Street Bridge because that's where people were trying to like run across and run out of the city. A lot of stuff was like happening as people tried to leave. But luckily the wind died down because like we said before, these things just have to end. Like you can't like douse it with water. So on October 9th, it started to rain and the fire slowly went out. The last house that the fire claimed was owned by a man named John A. Huck. So poor guy. His house
Yeah.
was the last one to go. All in all, about $222 million in damage, which is one third of the total city's value at the time. 2,000 lampposts, 17,500 buildings, 120 miles of sidewalks, 73 miles of road, and officially about 300 people died, but probably more.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure there's
Yeah,
because I would assume at that time, like it's hard to keep tabs on people anyways, you
yeah,
know?
exactly,
This is not
exactly.
like IDs and whatever, like it's probably not as prevalent.
Yeah, if you like lose your family, you like lose your family. You don't know where they are, like
Right.
where things are. So the mayor put the U.S. Army general in charge and put the city under martial law for 2 weeks to make sure that people weren't looting and weren't like hurting each other. There were roving police special units, citizen volunteers, just trying to make sure there wasn't any lawlessness. There was deadly force was allowed if someone like didn't comply. So it was kind of crazy there for a while afterwards. Tons of aid came from all over the world. So people were giving money from everywhere. FDR's dad gave $5,000, and a bunch of cities and individuals helped. The money was managed by a charity that like wasn't great. It didn't. It was one of those charities that was like, oh, we don't need to give the poor that much because they're always poor. You're like, no, like you should help everyone. But it was eventually managed and doled out, and then they started to rebuild, and they rebuilt rebuilt better, like what happened before. And now that started a lot of what we see in Chicago with like the terracotta buildings, obviously skyscrapers. The first skyscrapers were there. There was someone who was like, let's make an 11-story building because we're going to make like the skeleton out of steel. And people were like, no, that's crazy. You could never do that, you know? So they had the opportunity then to do the beginnings of these things. And then by the 1890s, they have, that World's Fair. So things are pretty much rebuilt, pretty quickly there. Um, Mrs. O'Leary was never charged with anything. They did like bring her to court, and she was like, I was not in the barn. I would not have been milking my cow. I didn't do it. I didn't start it. Some people have like a theory that like a meteorite hit and like hit Chicago, and that's what happened, or whatever. But it was like all those conditions to have a terrible fire that we talk about. They were all
Is
there.
it isn't it almost like not then for those people, but like kind of now? Wasn't it like kind of like the best thing that could have happened to Chicago was the whole thing fucking burned to the ground and then they rebuilt it?
I know. It feels, yeah, yeah. I mean, I kind of think like, yes, like for these cities, especially when you're at like the cusp of the Industrial Revolution, where like you can start building things out of steel, and you don't have to tear people's houses down because they're already down.
Yeah,
Sure, and it obviously Chicago, it continued to grow. Um, the place where the O'Leary's barn is in 1956, the Chicago Fire Academy was built on that site, and it's still there today. So Chicago firefighters are trained on the spot that the Chicago fire started in.
that's so
It's cool.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's it.
I'm gonna look up this site of the O'Leary's farm. Oh
Yep,
man,
Chicago, Chicago.
they should have kept the barn.
I know. I'm sure it's just like, um, I don't know, melted away by
Well,
now. Chicago Fire Academy,
um,
it's about soccer. Not soccer.
yeah, I was gonna ask about that. I was going through the Chicago Fire FC's face Wikipedia page and was like, how is nobody said anything about this?
I
Like,
totally agree. No, I totally agree. Like that, it seems ill. Like,
it's like in like 200 years they call like a baseball team the 9/11 New
exactly.
Yorkers. Like it's like
Exactly.
little insensitive. But I guess so much time has passed that maybe they don't care.
Yeah, I know, but I know that's funny that like, after this much time, it can be something that's like funny and like ubiquitous with the word Chicago when you're like, I don't know.
We don't need it ubiquitous.
Yeah,
Um, man, there's so many of these. There's so many like horrible times. Like,
I know. And a lot of them, I mean, a lot of them are like the similar things. Like you just have those like things are bad, and especially in these older cities. So I read a Stephen King book a long time ago called Cell, but it's about cell phones. Like, well, something happened and like cell phones happened and there's like magic in it and like whatever all stuff happens. But like in his intro, he's like, I wrote this story thinking, could a modern city burn? Like, could a modern Boston burn down the way that like these things did? And it has to be like tons of chaos and the people have to like be in on it. It was like his answer, and it was, magical and mystical and all those things. But I don't know if that could like happen these days as much as like you can destroy it with like bombing. Obviously, we see that all the time, but like our cities aren't really like made of wood in this way.
I don't know because I remember living in Los Angeles and it was like, do you remember Taylor that one day we were driving to work and there was that huge
Oh yeah. The
building, the
building.
apartment. Yeah, it was that huge
Hmm.
apartment complex. It was mid construction and somebody torched it and you're just driving down and you're like, what? Like that was incredible.
That, but
Wow,
also it didn't spread.
it's true. It didn't spread, but it didn't spread because I think it was in the heart of downtown. But at the
Yeah.
same time, you look at like Malibu, for example, where they'll have wildfires, and you
Yeah.
know it'll be like Pepperdine is the only thing that was saved because they create all these breaks and stuff, and like
Hmm.
they planned for a wildfire to happen there, which is like,
Hmm.
Do you remember that where they were like telling their students not to go home and not to leave because they could get caught in the wildfire and they were safer there? I so would have left. I
I
so been
mean,
like,
but that's how you die. You die when you like try to run away.
I
Like in your
know.
car. Oh, no, you're right. Because you're right. But I was thinking like big city like Chicago, there's full of skyscrapers. I feel like no. But a smaller city, especially in California, with all of our wildfires, definitely.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Terrifying, absolutely terrifying.
Cool. Lots of fun ways to die this week.
You got clouds, you got fires. Let's see what we can
Oh my
cover
God.
next week.
Unbelievable.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that, Taylor. I hope at some point we can get to the San Francisco fire because I think if I recall correctly, that also was an earthquake. It was literally just like hell opening up on Earth, and
I think it was all connected. I think it was at 1904 earthquake turned to the fire, but I will get to that for sure. I did actually, so I just am finishing up my 2 weeks off, but I prepped at least read books for three other episodes that I'm excited about, so I feel a little bit ahead.
fun.
Yeah.
Sweet. Cool. Well, if there's nothing else, we can go ahead and wrap. Again, per usual, please do write to us at doomtofailpod@gmail.com. Find us on socials. We love to hear from people. And we're doing a little bit of a later release this week than usual, given some issues that have arisen.
Fine. Everything's fine. A little
Everything's
bad.
fine. Nobody's
Um,
mad.
cool. Well, thank you. Yeah, doomtofailpod@gmail.com. Doomtofailpod at everything. Please tell your friends. Please review us on Apple Podcasts. We really would love to have more people listen. And we're trying our best to hustle. If you're a podcast promoter or know someone who is, let us know. We need help.
We need some help.
It would be great.
So awesome. Well, thank you,
Cool.
Taylor. We'll go ahead and cut things off there.
In the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA096.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
And we are off to a relatively late recording. Taylor's yawning. I'm
I know
completely in the
it's
dark.
7 o'clock and I'm
We
yawning.
we are mixing it up this time, but we're here and we are doomed to fail yet again. The podcast with Taylor and Bars, myself. I call myself Bars in the third person, covering random topics that we find interesting. And sometimes there's a common theme, and most of the time there isn't. Is that a fair
Great.
enough summarization?
That's perfect. Tell your friends.
Tell your friends. Uh, and I think, given the fact that we kind of went off script with who goes first 2 times ago or last time, I think it's you this time, right, Taylor?
Yes, I go first.
Sweet. Do you want to, am I
Um,
going to be able to guess, or are you going to do this?
oh, I hadn't thought of, well, okay. This is going to be in two parts. Okay, I'm gonna have you guess. I will have you guess. This is in two parts. Because it's two disasters right after each other.
Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
No, but we should do that sometime. Um, no, it's in the same place, and one thing is because of tectonic plates shifting, and the other thing is just like the aftermath.
San Francisco.
Yes.
Thank you.
I guess I gave it. That was easy. Okay. So because this is such a long story and so much happened in the with the earthquake and then the fire, I I'm going to do it in two parts. So I'm going to start with the earthquake and a little bit of the history of San Francisco and California. But you know what this reminded me of that I just think is like so freaking funny. You know that song, the song "We Built This City"
Yeah.
on rock and roll? So there's a GQ article um, called "An Oral History of We Built This City, the Worst Song of All Time," and it's so funny. I will link to it, but it's like the people who made it are like, everyone shut up. I can't believe it's still on the radio. Like, we're really excited because we made a lot of money, but like, oh my God, we're so embarrassed. And then like one guy's like, that was the best song on that album. How can it be the worst song ever? And then like it's just everyone's mad. Like everyone was like fighting when they're making it. The guy who does the DJ part, where he's like, the city that never sleeps, the city that rocks. He is so embarrassed. He's like he did one take and then threw his headphones and he was like, fuck you guys. Like everyone was just so mad and it's a really hilarious read. So I will link to that
I
because
love I love when
delightful.
bands like hate each other. Like
Yeah,
the Oasis brothers, the
I
fact that they
know.
like literally
Idiots.
get into like fist fights every time they record is like the
Yeah.
funniest thing to me.
Totally. Um, that's like I feel like that's the only San Francisco song I know, but that was just so funny. Um, and lest anyone think that I think California is perfect and has no blemishes upon her history, I'm going to talk a little bit about how California became a state, and how it grew, and then address the historical precedent of the Supreme Court case, the United States versus Wong King Kim Ark, and then we'll talk about what was happening right up into the earthquake in 1906. Cool.
Wait, so is this a two-part series?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. All right.
Yeah, and then we'll do the fire next week.
Sweet. When you said it's in two parts, I thought you meant the way I do it with like Act One, Act Two, but you
Oh
meant like
no,
literally two. Okay,
I meant
got it.
literally two times, two
Mini
of them.
series.
Yeah, it's pretty serious.
Love it.
Um, so have you been to San Francisco?
Yeah, I've been a few times. Yeah.
I've never really been. I went to Oakland like a month ago, but I don't think I've ever like stepped foot in San Francisco. I've been to like the airport, you know?
The only time, no, I've only had my car broken in twice. Once was in college, and the other time was when we were working at our last company together, and I they told me I had to go to San Francisco for some conference, and I parked across from like the major park. I forget what it's called, but my car got broken into. It was awful.
Boo. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. You drove
Yeah.
there? It's a long drive.
Well, it was from LA.
Yeah, still, I know, but still,
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah, right.
yeah,
Okay. Yeah,
yeah,
fair
because California is huge. I know you didn't drive from Texas. Jesus, that would take you like 7 days. That'd be terrible.
enough.
Um, no, don't do that. So before the arrival of the Europeans, San Francisco area was home of the Ohlone tribe. They lived there for thousands of years. They had, many different languages, different little groups, and they were mostly hunter-gatherers, but they did have a little bit of like small gardens. They didn't have like huge fields, but they had like a little bit of agriculture. So they lived there, for thousands of years until Europeans came. And the people that came to that part of California were the Spanish, because that was part of the Spanish colonies on the United States. And in 1776, the Spanish explorers established a mission called, I apologize right now to my in-laws and every Hispanic person when I say this, it's the Presidio of San Francisco, and the Mission of San Francisco de Asís, known as Mission Dolores. So maybe that wasn't that too bad. The Mission Dolores is what it was called. So it was like a local mission, and it was meant to um, convert the Olones into Christians, of course. That was their goal.
Love it.
Um, yeah,
Let's make everybody Christian.
why not? So Mexico gained control of California, the state, like our area, in 1821, once after it won independence from Spain, which we've talked about. So Mexico becomes its own country. California is part of that country of Mexico. Um, and what they would
Wait, hold on.
do,
California was part of Mexico?
yeah, it was like all like California was part of Mexico and like that part of Texas, then enter the Mexican-American War in 1846 to 1848, where the United States like took over Canada and then like later got
Wait,
Texas after.
Canada?
Not Canada, I'm so sorry, California. Jesus
Okay.
Christ.
We're people,
Do you
we're
see how
not
do you see
historians.
do you see how pink my face is? I feel like I got sunburnt doing our cookie
You're flush, and I felt like it
thing.
was like you might be drinking something.
I'm not. I'm drinking tea, but I think I got a little sunburn today. Selling cookies outside the Walmart, so I just feel a little pink. I
That'll
guess
do
it's
it.
cute. It's cute, and I have the Zoom glow on.
It's
So
like, yeah, blush on. I think that's
yeah,
what women call it.
yeah, it is. Great job.
Thank you.
So okay, I meant to say California. So now California is now part of the United States. And we became part of the United States because of the Mexican-American War. And then there was a ceasefire agreed in January 1847. So the Mexican-American War ended with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. And the treaty had Mexico ceded present-day California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and parts of Nevada, Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming. So it was a huge land
Big get.
after that one. Yeah, big get after that. It's like when you do like double war, playing war with cards, and you get like a king and an ace. It's
Great
very exciting.
analogy.
Um, and so that's happening and they're trying to figure out like how to do it. Like you can't just like, it doesn't happen overnight. They're trying to figure out the different treaties. And in the meantime, so that treaty was signed in 1848. So possibly right before it was signed or possibly right after it was signed, there was gold found in a place called Sutter's Mill in the Sierra Nevada foothills near Coloma, California, that where it is now. And when they found the gold, and then people rushed. That's the gold rush, which I feel like we should talk about. I'm sure it has some like fun stories in it, but essentially that's when the population of California really started to boom because of the prospect of gold. Um, and the people who were digging for gold, do you remember what they're called?
Gold diggers.
Well, no, 49ers.
Oh,
That's a person digging gold. And I didn't I was like, why is that? Like, why are they called that? And it's just because they mostly came in 1849.
Oh, well, there you go. That makes
Yeah.
sense.
Like, when did you come here? 49, for the gold. So, by this time, so it's 1849, tons of people are moving to California from the other parts of the US for gold, for opportunity, for all the things. And then California officially became a state in 1850. So on September 9th, 1850, President Millard Fillmore signed resolution to get California in. It was the 31st state in the United States. So that was also part of the 1850 compromise because there was still, this is pre-Civil War, and they were trying to figure out how they can add new states and which states will allow enslaved people, which states won't. So California was admitted as a free state, but there was still a pretty terrible and strict fugitive slave law that if you ran away from being enslaved to California, they would send you back.
Wait,
So
California would send you back.
yeah, like it wasn't a safe place. Like I think, and
Then
I
who
could be
is it
wrong.
free for?
You couldn't like start new. You couldn't,
Oh,
you couldn't like have slaves there, but you also like it also wasn't a safe place for them. Like I think like New York might have been, or like some of the other like northern places were like a safe place that you could essentially like run away to, but you couldn't run away to California. You could be
got
sent
it.
back. Um, so that's where we are. We are in California, and there's like tension over that, but we are our own state, and there is going to be like some pretty big like racial tension things happening in California and the United States then and now and always. But in California, there was specifically a ton of racism towards Chinese people. Um, Obviously, like this sounds really stupid when I say it out loud, but I feel like it's much easier to get to it. This is not dumb. Like it's easy to get to the West Coast from China. Like it's harder to get to New York, like so people were coming from
What?
China, right? Like if you have a boat, I feel like that's why there's more
Hold
Chinese
on.
people. You
If
know what I
you have
mean?
a boat, you think that it's easier to get across the Pacific Ocean?
Yeah, then get to New York because you'd have to go down the Cape, the bottom,
Okay, fine.
and then
In
around.
in that context, it is easier to get there than it is. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'm not saying like now, but I'm saying like then. So I feel like that's why there was like
Yeah,
immigration from Asia and
okay.
more on the West Coast. I don't know if that's true. I'm sorry. Okay, but there's a huge increase of Chinese immigration in the 1850s and 1860s. So there was a guy who was the mayor of San Francisco until 1902. He was also a U.S. senator named James D. Phelan, and he campaigned under the slogan "Keep California White" because he wanted to stop immigration. He has some real bad posters that show like a hand from the east trying to grab California. So it's not great. Um, so that there's a lot of tension kind of happening there. Um,
Meanwhile, literally, like all technology was invented, like right there in San Francisco.
so the Chinese immigrants were a ton of them worked on like the Transcontinental Railroad. They did a bunch of a lot of manual labor. They had their own like community in San Francisco and in other places. Like now, they're the Chinatown in like most big cities, you know. And a lot of that was because they were like isolated. They were the other. It's an easy to see other, like you can people would, you know, um, obviously treat them differently. And it got real bad. In 1882 was the first Chinese Exclusion Act, so you could no longer immigrate to the United States from China. They blocked people coming from China at all. And then there was an act that there were a couple more acts that kept renewing the Exclusion Act. So that it was actually law until 1943. You couldn't immigrate to the United States from China um, without like special circumstances or whatever. Um, and oh my gosh, did you take a citizenship law class when you were in law school?
No, I took. I mean, I'm a naturalized. I was naturalized, so I have done
Yeah,
the process.
it's confusing as shit reading this Wikipedia page about it. So please
Wait,
chime
which
in.
what's confusing about it?
Well, like there's just
The
like a lot.
test?
No, 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 not the test, but like the law around citizenship is like very complicated. But one of the things that came up, especially specifically in San Francisco during this time, is the 14th Amendment. Do you know what that one is? Also, amendments aren't just like
No.
a sentence, they're like very long, complicated. But the The 13th Amendment was for to repeal slavery, and
Yeah.
then the 14th was about citizenship because this is simplifying it, but like all of a sudden you have freed a huge population of people, and before they had no rights and they like were not even considered American. So you have to be like they are now US citizens, and they had to figure out like why and how they would be able to like do that, you know? So that's what the
Yeah, I never thought
14th
about
Amendment
that, but yeah,
did.
makes
Yeah.
sense.
So, one of the things in the 14th Amendment is that if you are born on American soil, you are a U.S. citizen. So I think we've heard that like a
Yep.
bunch always. So, there is a man named Wong Kim Ark, and he is born around 1873 in San Francisco. His parents are Wong Si-ping and Li Wei. They immigrated from China, but they weren't U.S. citizens. But they lived in San Francisco. They had a business, and they were like it was before the Chinese Exclusion Act, so they were able to live in California and have their business and like contribute to the community, all the things like they lived there. But then they decided to move back to China. So his parents moved back to China, and Wong would visit them, and he visited them a couple times. He actually got married to a woman in China, and they had a couple kids, but he couldn't bring them to the United States because of the Chinese Exclusion Act. So he would like visit them and was trying to figure out how to get them into the United States. So November 1894, Wong goes to China to visit his family, and he stays there for about a year, and he comes back in August 1895. And he's a U.S. citizen. He has a U.S. passport. He's was born here, all the things. And they were like, nah, they decided that they didn't want to let him back in. And they kept him, this is like, sounds fucking terrible, on a boat in like the San Francisco port for 5 months, like while they were trying to figure out what to do with him.
Was that would have been federal, right? Like
I think so. Well, it was like a state thing first and ended up going to the Supreme Court, the US Supreme Court,
that's wild.
to figure out like what to do. And he was ended up being allowed to stay. And it is the law of Jus soli, Jussoli, which means right of the soil, which is like what they ended up putting in the ended up like, clarifying in the 14th Amendment meant if you're born on U.S. soil, you are a U.S. citizen. They were asked to the question that the Supreme Court was essentially asked is this is a quote, kind of long, but whether a child born in the United States of parents of Chinese descent, who at time of his birth are subjects to the Emperor of China, but have a permanent domicile and residence in the United States, and are there carrying on business and are not employed in a diplomatic or official capacity under the Emperor of China, becomes at the time of his birth a citizen of the United States. And so they voted that that was yes, and he was allowed to stay. And eventually he did get his family involved. His son fought in World War II. So they ended up, staying in America. But that was like a big case to kind of clarify one of the points of the 14th Amendment.
You know what's interesting is when I took my American citizenship, they told me to like renounce quote unquote my Iranian citizenship, but I
Hmm.
had no Iranian, like there was no legal document of that because in Iran it's not like that concept you just articulated, which is like you're born here because I wasn't born in
Hmm.
Iran. Because to them, like my blood is Iranian, 'cause my parents are Iranian, so like they don't
Yes.
give a shit what citizenship paper I have. It's like
Hmm.
you are blood Iranian. So like they don't. I mean that's literally why I don't go back and why I'll never go back is because they could like, oh, this is your American passport. Go fuck yourself. Like it
Yeah,
doesn't really
t
matter.
totally. And I think I was trying to understand it like very quickly, but there are like other things that are like that. Like, some countries are like you are the citizenship of like your parents' blood, like
Yeah,
it's not because you're here, that kind of
yeah.
thing.
America's actually like weirdly lax about that compared to like other places.
Yeah, I didn't never thought about it, like what it means other places. The only thing I ever thought about is like if you're born somewhere else, you can't be president. I don't know,
Yeah,
like, you know,
yeah. That was drilled into me when I was young. I was like, I'm gonna be president one day. I was just like a bushy-tailed little fars, and yeah, it's not gonna
well,
happen.
Well, when one of my kids becomes president, either one, I think could do it. I'm gonna give ghost tours of the White House, so you're welcome to join me if you'd like. They're gonna be at night, and it's gonna be really fun, and the Secret Service is gonna hate it.
They have my vote, whichever one runs.
Thank you. Thank you. They'll be great. But yeah, so that's what's happening. There's like a lot of racial tension in California. In San Francisco, the city is very divided on like different like class areas. But let's talk a little bit about San Francisco, which is where we know the earthquakes are, obviously. I
Of
feel like
course.
everyone knows that. Um, what I didn't know is that a lot of San Francisco, at least like the Mission area and like some other areas are built like on piles of trash because people would like literally get so excited to come to California for gold that they would like drive their boat into the beach and just leave it, and then they'd go. And then so there was like trash and like buildings and stuff, and they were just kind of like piled up over, many years. And then they built a lot of the city on top of that trash pile, which like they do. Like there's like fill land in like New York City, like where they extend the shoreline to be able to build on top of it. But like a lot of San Francisco like wasn't even built on bedrock. So it was definitely like not a super safe thing to do in a place
Yeah,
that has earthquakes.
when we were living in LA, didn't they have, was there a story in San Francisco about this like luxury condo high rise, like multi-million dollar condos, and it was like leaning, and so like everybody had to like evacuate or something. Do you remember this?
I don't remember, but I believe that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was something about how like it was not built on bedrock because of that, and
Hmm.
it went into okay, anyways,
Yeah, no,
this all sounds
exactly.
familiar.
Yeah, so like that's not safe. You should get a stick and put it in your yard and make sure that you hit bedrock before you go to sleep tonight, just so you know that you're safe.
Yes, listeners in San Francisco, just get out of your condo, go down the 70
Everybody should do it.
stories.
Um, but San Francisco, because of the gold rush, because of all these things, it is now 1906. It is the biggest city west of St. Louis. There are 400,000 people living in San Francisco in 1906. It is April, specifically 1906, and it has been very dry, of course. Like that's kind of what you need to have a disaster like a fire. And a lot of the buildings are made of wood. San Francisco really hadn't had like a huge devastating fire, so places like Chicago, when that was in the 1870s, like they've already rebuilt and rebuilt better. But San Francisco didn't really have that. And when they did have things like there were mini earthquakes and like fires and all the things that happened, but when those things happened, they would pass new laws that were like, now we have to build buildings better, but they never retroactively went back and changed the older buildings.
Yeah,
You know, I mean, because I mean that's fair. It sounds like a lot of work. Like no one wants to do it, but it made it, the tinderbox that it ended up being during this
right.
time. It's also, and this is also another thing that I feel is stupid that I didn't think about, but like, duh, San Francisco has a bunch of hills because of the tectonic plates. Like, I get it now. Like that, I don't know. I never thought like the hilliness of it is because of like the earthquakes that have been in San Francisco for
But is it
all
what
time.
is it? What is it? The fact that there's several that converge there, like what?
It's just the biggest one. So the San Andreas Fault is the one that like goes up California, as we know, and it is the Pacific and the North American plates. And the way that they are next to each other, so like we learned this in the volcano series that like this is the visual portion. So I have two plates. If I go down with one and up with the other, then I can create like a volcano and like mountain ranges like the Himalayas,
Right.
because then I'm going like making these huge cracks in the earth and like that's huge. Or I can have two tectonic plates that rub against each other. Like I think I saw this before, but this was the example that stuck with me in a book that I read about volcanoes is it's like when you are parallel parking and you hit the curb and you're like next to the curb and it kind of squeaks, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah,
That's what the San Andreas fault is. So it is just those two kind of pushing against each other. So it kind of like rumbles. It's not going to make Himalayas anytime soon, but it is going to make like little hills because it like, does all the rumbling and like kind of
yeah,
it's
yeah.
kind of smushing against each other.
Makes sense.
I think I'm sorry,
Well, no,
geologists.
the reason I bring it up is because it's like obvious, like San Francisco is the scariest part of the world, I think, when it comes to earthquakes or the assumption of
Hmm.
what's going to happen in San Francisco.
Hmm.
But it's like, why is it so? Because there's a, they're everywhere, but it sounds like it's because it's like you said, it's the biggest one, and probably one thing I heard. is that the pressure there has been building up for a lot longer than anywhere else and hasn't been
Mm.
actually really released yet. And so
Hmm.
that's probably one of the other reasons why it's the scariest because when it does release, it's going to release a shit ton of energy.
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah. That totally makes sense. But because of the hills, and again, like I always think about people who live on like a hill in San Francisco, and I'm like, that sounds terrible. Like I live on a hill and it's exhausting. Like when I walk to the bottom and I have to walk back up, I'm like, oh, it's not even that big of a hill. But
You drive up the hill.
in San Francisco,
No, you.
no, I know, but I go for walks.
Okay, okay,
I like,
fine, fine.
okay. Um, but
I was saying you're not walking down to the bottom of the hill for the market.
I know that sounds terrible. Yeah, what I'm saying
Yeah,
like that
okay.
sounds awful. Yeah. So it's also then hard to get water to those places because of the pressure and like going like up, the pressure going up a hill and like all of this. So just like keep that in mind. It's hard to get water to different places in San Francisco. Everything's made of wood and it has been very dry. But nevertheless, the fire department is really fucking great. It is as good as it can be for this time in history. So they have over 500 full-time firefighters. So it's not volunteers, it's like people who it's their job. They have like stations all over the city. It's all horse-drawn carriages right now, but they're ready for everything. The fire chief, his name was Dennis T. Sullivan. He was 53 years old and he was very proud of what he had done, which totally is absolutely makes sense because like they work really, really hard. The fire chief from Denver, Colorado, happened to be in town on this night. So this is the night of April 17th, 1906. And he was like, the buildings here are all wood. This place is going to like unbelievably catch on fire. But then he met with Chief Sullivan and he was like, no, actually everything's gonna be fine because you guys are top-notch firefighters. Like this is the best it can possibly be. So um they the fire department had, of course, like been at a fire the night before. And it's the same thing that we heard in like Chicago, like, a building full of paper is going to catch on fire, and like
Yeah.
there's so much reliance on fire. There's actually parts of San Francisco had been fitted with electricity. So there were like some like electric street lamps and a lot of businesses had electricity, but most residential houses still had just like gas for their lighting. If they did like convert a gas-powered home to electricity, they would like this sounds so unbelievably unsafe, but they would just like instead of putting the wires in the walls, they would just like hang the wires along the top of the wall, So like plenty of opportunity for shit to catch on fire, you know?
I kind of get it.
Yeah. So, okay, it's April 17th, the night before, and this is like when you think the night before a disaster, you just remember everything from it, you know? Like you would never remember that night until the disaster happens the next day, and then you'll like never forget what happened during that night. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah.
Like I remember like September 10th, so the day before September 11th, it rained a ton. I remember what I was wearing. I remember I went to
Seriously?
yeah, it was pouring rain and like I was super poor because I was in college, I didn't have any money, and I was wearing these like bell-bottom jeans and these like huge shoes that I got in Germany and like but they were like soaked to my knees and I had bought a bunch of bagels at our bagel store, had a 25-cent bagels Monday nights. So I bought a bunch of them. I had it in my backpack. It was raining so hard. I usually walked like a mile and a half to my apartment, but I couldn't do it because it was so raining so hard. So I took the train. I remember sitting on the train and like a little girl told me she liked my backpack. Like I remember all that happening. I went to my house. I cut all the bagels in half. I put them all in the freezer and wrote September 10th on all of them. And then, then I remember hanging my jeans in the back of my chair because they were wet. I went on like AIM and was mad because the boy like didn't message me like everything because the next day was September 11th. And then I remember that. You know what I mean? You're like
Yeah, but
this is the
the,
last time that I felt that's the last time I was before this event in my life. You know?
that amount of details intense. Like you remembered a lot of details.
Hmm. Well, I have a good memory, but also like I just feel like it's just like that was like the last time I was the person who hadn't been through that, you know?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then
it makes
and then I was
sense.
someone else. So there's a lot of stories of the night before the earthquake of people being like, I did this and it felt normal, or like kids being like, oh, I went to my friend's house and I came home and I went to sleep, and like you just like remember those things. It was a big opera night in San Francisco. There were there was a sh opera of Carmen, and everybody loved it. And so there were a lot of people like out doing like fancy things the night before. San Francisco also has I'm sure it's probably is like all big cities, but there's a ton of hotels and people who would like live in like rented rooms and just kind of like, stay in a place for a short amount of time and then go somewhere else. So there's a ton of that happening. And so it was a very, very nice night. Actually, I think a couple days before this, Mount Vesuvius had erupted. And people in the Italian section of San Francisco were raising money to send back to Italy to help people.
Wow.
And so everything was normal except some horses started to act weird because they always know, you know?
Yeah.
So people were like, especially like in the middle of the night, people were like, I don't know, my horse is like kind of going crazy and I don't really know why. Um, And I have a bunch of like anecdotal stories about the earthquake from the book that I'm reading. It's called The Longest Minute, so I'll put that in the notes as well. But the earthquake struck at 5:12 a.m. on April 18th, 1906. The epicenter was actually in the water. So like they didn't know where it was for a while, but like it happened in the water. And there's a story of a dude who was swimming and he was like, things are weird. Like he was like going for his like morning swim and he tried to go to the beach and like put his shoes on and he couldn't. He kept like falling over because he was like, what is happening? Like it was just like it's confusing. Have you felt earthquakes when you were here, right?
Oh yeah.
And it's just confusing. You're
It's
like,
very confusing. Your
what's
equilibrium
happening?
is off in a way that your brain cannot comprehend. Also, what a fucking psychopath. Like, can you imagine waking up in the morning at 5 o'clock in the morning, going to an empty beach and swimming into the middle of the like, what a
I know,
lunatic that guy is.
100%. We were just talking last night, like my husband wants like an ice plunge, and I'm like, you're an insane person. Um, but yes, so
Those
that
are
guy was
fun. I do support this. So I did it consecutively for 3 days, and then I realized I'm not strong enough to keep doing this. But it really did feel amazing. It really felt
nice.
like a new thing in your body was like unlocking and a new endorphin rush was happening. So I
Well,
support you, Juan.
that's what I think that guy was trying to do.
That guy was
The,
nuts.
he was
5
just like,
a.m. Taylor. 5 a.m. What a scary time
it's true.
to go into San Francisco Bay full of
I know.
sharks.
I
Like,
think maybe in general, swimming in the San Francisco Bay, it sounds terrifying. So it's a bad idea. But he was like, but anyway, that's what he remembered. So the earthquake lasted 42 seconds, which is really long. Some
yeah.
people were like, it felt like, a day, like it just 42 seconds. It was a 7.9 on the Richter scale,
Oh,
which is, I mean, it's like there's another scale on the other scale, it's just like extreme, like crazy. The Richter scale actually wasn't invented until a couple decades later, but in retrospect, it was a 7.9
yeah.
and just huge. It was felt all the way down in Los Angeles, so over in Nevada, which makes sense because it's right next door. The Winchester Mystery House lost some of its floors, as we talked about before, and they were never rebuilt, which is why they have staircases that go to nowhere.
Yeah.
We talked about that before. So a few earthquake reminders for myself and you, in case there's ever an earthquake in Texas, and everyone else. So these are the ones I have so far. I'll probably have more. One of them is always put shoes under your bed because the glass in your house is going to fall and break. So you need to be able to like leave your home and not cut your feet. So you should have shoes under your bed to be able to do that. You also need a crowbar to get out of your room, potentially, and out of your house because like the whole house can shift and you can't open doors anymore. So get a crowbar. And then also, as soon as the earthquake is done, as much as you can, just like fill your bathtub with water, fill every pot with water because you just like don't know what might happen with the water. It could definitely be cut off like ASAP. So those are my three things so far.
Do you
Um,
have a crowbar under your bed?
I don't, but I should get one.
Yeah,
I don't,
you
e-
really, really should.
I don't have shoes under my bed either, but I know that I need to do that. So earthquakes again, they're super loud. It's the buildings, it's the earth, it's like confusing and crazy. I will talk about the death toll from both disasters next week, but um, a lot of people died in their beds from their chimneys falling on them. Like a lot of people died that way. Because most houses had like a brick chimney, and those were like the first things to fall. So a lot of people died that way. A lot of people died, and you don't know, like we'll never know what happened to them. Like there's like people heard screaming and rubble, and then screaming stopped. So you don't know what happened to that person. So many people who just like probably woke up and were like everything shaking, what's going on, and then they were dead, or they were trapped for days, and like we'll never know. Like it's just like really like horrible things. And a lot of the people who were in like hotels, some of them were like just in town for something, and no one knew who they were. So there were just like a lot of like unaccounted for like dead bodies and things like that that people were just like you didn't have to like identification, all of that happened too. So a lot of people, a ton of people died in the initial earthquake ex itself. Um, one of the stories that I heard is just so fucking terrible. So a couple people got caught in Murphy beds, those beds that like go
Oh
down and up.
God.
And so like some of them died and some of them were, befriend like they would be visiting someone, be in the Murphy bed and then be like the friends would be like, "Oh my God, we have to go check on our guests," and like they would get them out and they were like nearly suffocating. The one story that I heard that's absolutely the worst is a man and his wife, they're both in their 60s, and as soon as the earthquake started, the man sat up and then the Murphy bed closed and broke his neck.
Oh my
And
God.
the and when the people who lived in the house went to go see them, they found them. The wife was alive and like almost suffocated.
That's horrific. That's like
Is that
being
terrible?
raked into a wall. Like,
Ugh. Just like so, so terrible. So a lot of people died that way. And then also this actually kind of reminded me of the Kansas City Hyatt that you talked about because the some of the hotels like all of a sudden the fourth floor would be like on the first floor. You know what I mean? Like it
yeah.
just like pancaked the floors below it. And so people were drowning in the rubble like
Oh
that
yeah.
happened there, because like then like the water mains were breaking and so some people drowned, some people were crushed. You don't really know some people like, burned right away, but you'd hear screaming or, there's, someone would yell like there's three people here trapped and then they were just like you just never heard from them again, like they, died there together somehow. Um, so it is still really early in the morning. And one thing that happens right away, so the fire chief, Chief Sullivan, he had been in a big fire the night before. And when he came home, he didn't want to wake up his wife. So he slept on the couch, like in another room. So when the earthquake happened, he got off the couch and went to go into the bedroom to see if his wife was okay. And when he opened the door, he didn't realize that there was no floor in the bedroom because the building next door had collapsed into the bedroom. So he did one step and he fell several stories down and he was caught. And when they found him, he was still alive, but he was like um getting like pummeled with like hot water from like a pipe. So he was like getting those burns from the water and they got him out. And then they were like, he was like, you have to find my wife, you have to find my wife. And they found her and she was okay. Her bed had fallen 2 stories and she was just like wrapped in her bed and
So
actually
crazy.
ended up being fine, which is crazy. So now people are like, what do we, what are like, people are trying to like figure out what to do. Everyone's standing outside and now it's quiet. People are just like confused. A lot of people are like, in different states of undress because they were sleeping. So
Yeah.
some people like they only have like a nightgown and some people like only have like one or two things and they're trying to find their children. So there's people like crying and trying looking around and people are like sitting in the park together, but they're all like just everybody's just confused. Um, there's like rubble everywhere. And then almost immediately, that's when the fires start because of all sorts of different reasons. So we will talk about the fire that actually destroyed most of San Francisco um, next time.
Doug, can I tell you that so do you remember you had a friend who had a friend who had an apartment that he was subleasing in Los Feliz, and we had
Hmm.
never met before, but we knew we were
Hmm.
going to start work at the same time together.
Hmm.
And so I was like, I don't know where to live. You were going to Airbnb a place, but you introduced me to this guy, and I ended
Hmm.
up subleasing his apartment. And
Hmm.
that was the first time I experienced an earthquake where I don't even remember what time it was, but it was early. I think it was like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning or something like along
Hmm.
those lines. And I just remember like the bed shaking and kind of moving, quivering towards the center of the room, and you wake up and you're like, your brain can't even process what's
Yeah.
happening. Do you
Yeah.
remember that earthquake? That would have been in 2013. Do you remember that one? You
I
were you
remember
were in an Airbnb.
it happened I was not going to be the for the first month. It was during that month.
I think it was probably during that month, like
I
February,
don't
March.
remember. I don't remember. I remember one in LA where like Juan and I were watching TV and like we just like looked at each other and we were like, what's happening? Because it's just like loud and confusing. I felt a couple like little ones here out in Joshua Tree, but yeah, but it's confusing. And a lot of people in San Francisco, like some people went back to bed, because they like kind of woke them up or whatever and they were confused. And if their house wasn't literally falling on them, they just like
Yeah, like
kind of
that's
slept
the thing.
through it.
Like earthquakes have like a weirdly scary effect to me because okay, like I lived in Florida, lived in Texas. Like
Hmm.
I've ha been through hurricane season and through tornadoes, but earthquakes like so.
Super surreal. Like so another like memory that someone had from San Francisco is like, you're watching the road roll like a wave, you know? Like you're like that's not supposed to happen,
But that's
you
the thing, like
know?
it's the fact that it can happen anytime. There's like no warnings ever, no matter how advanced
Hmm.
science gets. There's never gonna be warnings for it. It's just okay. So like hurricane season in Miami, I was like, you knew a hurricane was coming in, and you could like decide for yourself like how big of a deal is this? Am I going to evacuate? Am I
Hmm.
not? Tornadoes, they're not really that horrible anyways, and if they are, you just go into the bathroom and whatever. Like an earthquake can like bring down the entire building on your head, and I don't know, it's just so scary. Like one of the when I left California, I actually had a tangible thought like. At least I don't have to think about that anymore because they always
Totally.
told us in LA. They always told us. Remember this? Like the big one's coming. The big one's coming. And
Oh yeah, there are those signs. So I have like a first aid kit that like has a bunch of stuff in it, and like we're supposed to have a lot of extra water and like things like that.
shoes and crowbars. Remember?
Yeah, because it's also gonna cut you off from like everything. And so like in San Francisco, immediately after it happened, all communication was cut off because all of the like lines broke. So
Yeah,
that's going to be a problem coming up in the fire because they can't tell everybody.
you should have like all your identification like photocopied in like the cars and everything else, and like have jugs of water everywhere. And I don't know, like
Hmm.
it's scary. I mean, you're less at risk in Joshua Tree than in San Francisco, obviously, but still,
Yeah, and I feel like, but yeah, like the idea of a building falling down is so scary,
it's so
Like if you're
scary.
like in those things and like that, it also, okay, so it also, because some of the buildings that have been destroyed in San Francisco during this earthquake are ones that were earthquake proof, and you're like, that's not a fucking thing, dude. So like one
No,
of the nicest hotel in town was the Palace Hotel at this time, and there were people. It did not collapse, and so like there were a lot of rich people in the lobby, like eating rolls and drinking coffee and being like, "What do we do?" Like trying to figure it out. But I remember when I worked at a hedge fund in New York, I was on the 37th floor of a building, and we would have, I'm sure I've told you this before, but we would have like a fire drill like once a quarter with the fire people, and they'd be like, "Okay, if there's a fire, you go to the 34th floor because that one's fireproof." And I was like, "You go fuck yourself. I'm going outside." Like, what are you talking about? I'm not going to the 34th floor because it's like allegedly fireproof. No, I'm going outside. I'm walking
yeah,
away. Like,
fireproof, unsinkable. Like these are
yeah,
words that if you
exactly.
hear, you're like,
Like,
I'm
yeah, no,
not
I'm gonna
listening to that.
have my own personal fire extinguisher and run out of this building. I'm like, there's thing. So, yeah, um,
Well,
crazy. Yeah,
um,
so things
I
are confusing,
also
things are scary, and about to catch on fire.
I also predicted this whenever you were doing the Chicago fire. I was like, it's got to be the San Francisco fire. So I'm
Well,
glad we're
yeah, of
getting
course I was
into
gonna
it.
have to do it eventually. Yeah.
Of course, you're gonna have to do it. The Daily, the New York Times podcast, did an episode recently, and you like kind of reminded me of it because you talked about China and San Francisco because they talked about how like the government in China is like making it so unpalatable for people that there's a guy who like got into an argument with the government there because they destroyed his business, whatever. A bunch of stuff happened, and
Hmm.
he couldn't come to the United States directly. He had nowhere to go, but he was like, the United States is the only place I can go. So like but you can't go directly there. So what he had to do was to fly to Ecuador with his daughter, and then
Hmm.
walk from Ecuador through Texas, like which I don't even know how far that is, but it like he knew he was gonna get arrested. Like that was the
Yeah,
game
yeah,
plan.
yeah.
He was doing to do it. He knew what was happening. Anyways, it was long story short, they shipped him to San Francisco while he's pending court trials and all that stuff. But anyways,
Interesting.
it's reminding me of that. But
Yeah.
random
Um,
aside,
yeah. So,
fun.
yeah, that's it for now. Talk
Um,
more later.
I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of this. Do we have anything we need to read out or?
I
or
do. I do. I have something fun.
you're
Um,
excited?
so my friend Morgan, who I told you, I mentioned that she had just started listening. She's really excited, and I think she's listened to all of them. She's like, I just finished episode one. Like she's a champ. She's listened to like us constantly.
Thanks,
Um,
Morgan.
but she used to work at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. I forgot that she had done
Hey, you
that.
got
So she
engaged
worked.
there.
I got engaged in the MoMA, but
Close
close.
enough.
So thank you for remembering that. So some fun things that happened while she worked at the Met. This is like in reference to the Mona Lisa and like art heists.
Yeah.
But she said that the Thomas Crown Affair, the interior in the Thomas Crown Affair, where they tell you that they're at the Met Museum, they're actually in the New York Public Library because the museum director thought that it would give thieves ideas on how to steal things out of the museum. And I was like, do you think that's true? And she was like, no one's watching Thomas Crown and being like, I'm going to do that. You know, like
Wouldn't put it past
very few people are following
humanity.
through on their art heist. Um, and she also said that one time someone had emailed in into an inbox that she was monitoring, and they had some questions because they're writing a heist book, and she wasn't allowed to answer them, which is hilarious.
Aw.
'Cause, like they're like worried about it. And then she said actually most of the frames at the Met are actually just like pieces of art themselves, like the
Yeah,
picture
I'm
frames. I even
sure.
talked about how like some people have like been just gotten in trouble for like stealing the frame of a painting, but that was cool. And then she also had one more art history thing that was fun, is that ancient Egyptians used egg-based paints as well. So we talked about that. That's what Leo used on the Last Supper. And there's a problem because birds can still smell the egg and they're pecking away at the walls.
Wait, the walls of what?
Like of these like buildings in Egypt where they had used the egg paint.
Oh, and the outside's okay. I thought you meant like the
Mhm.
paintings. I was like, why are there birds in the art gallery?
Um, so I think just like outside, but that's fun. And I was so jealous that she worked at the Met, so that's super cool.
That was a really
And
cool job. That was a
yeah,
really, really cool job. I've been there once. I'd never done New York, right?
I
And
know.
I should at some point. You
Yeah,
can be
I
my
also when
Sherpa.
I'll take you there. When I was little, I loved the book from the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweller. I have it here. It's like about this brother and sister who go on a field trip to the Met and they stay there. They like hide and they sleep in like the big grand bedrooms at night, and they find like a missing statue, and like it's just like really fun and adventurous. And I always loved that book so much, so I was so excited when I finally got to go.
We did that when we were kids. When we are kids, like I guess yeah, it would have been elementary schools in Dallas. We have a Dallas Science Museum. That's where the Omni thing and like it's really
Hmm.
cool. I really love it. They have like dinosaur stuff there, and they'll have kids spend the night like once a year,
Oh, so
and
fun. I did that in
so
Chicago.
fun,
It was so
so
fun.
fun. That was like probably my best childhood memory. Like,
Hmm. I did it
um,
in the Natural History Museum or the Museum of Natural History in Chicago, and um,
that'd be incredible. I can't imagine how like
they
that's
like
world famous.
they turned off the lights and gave us flashlights and let us just go play. And then we would like there'd be like turn a corner and there'd be like a mummy and we would like all scream. And they had like something where they were like pretending there was a ghost and just like all this stuff. And I'm like, I can't believe I got to do that. That was so fun.
So cool.
Ow.
Man, to go back to elementary school.
I know.
So next week we're going to cover the actual fire itself, but so far we're
Hmm.
through the conception of California, through its
Yeah.
acquisition, and
A
now an
little bit of
earthquake.
history. Yeah, and it's about let's say it's about 5:20. So it's been AM on April 18th, 1906. You're outside, the earthquake just happened. You've been sitting outside for like 5 minutes. You're super confused. And then you start to see smoke.
You're in your nightgown, wearing
You're
your
in your
like
nightie.
you're in your nightie, wearing like that Nana hat that's like big and
Hmm.
cone like in the old days.
You're holding like the one thing that you thought to bring, like the guy who was actually the main singer in the opera Carmen at that night. He had a signed picture of Teddy Roosevelt in his hotel room, and that's what he saved, which is fair. I say that too. So everyone's outside
Fun.
holding their one thing and like super confused.
Well, join us next week when we cover the actual fire of San Francisco. Well,
Cool.
looking forward to it. Sweet Teller, well, I'll go ahead and cut us off, and I'll see you in 20 minutes slash 3 days.
Okay, great.
In the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA096.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
And we're back to another episode of Doomed to Fail, which that means I did the introductions properly. I'm Bars, joined here by Taylor. And Taylor, did you just change between recordings?
No, I took my sweatshirt off because I'm getting hot.
Oh, then we're trying to do wardrobe changes between recordings. Sweet. And we're back to a new topic where this is going to be a Taylor's joint. And she's going to play the regular game of me guessing what she's going to cover, and I'm going to be wrong.
I mean, you know what I'm going to cover because I covered the first half last week.
San Francisco Fire.
Yes.
Got it.
Um, so okay. I feel like I got like 70% of the way there, and then the book I was reading was just like so long that I was like, I want to die. I was listening to it at 2.5 speed last night, and I was like, this has to end. So I feel like my ending of this, I'm not gonna land this as much as I want to, but we'll talk about it. So before we go and kind of recap last week and talk about the fire, I'm going to send you a picture. Can I send it in the chat in this?
I don't know,
Here.
but if not, you can send through Slack.
Okay, it's a link. I linked it twice. I'm like doing that. I'm 100 years old. There's a link. Can you click on that link, please, and describe what you're seeing in that picture?
Complete and utter devastation and a giant fire. It is black and white. There is clearly a trolley system running down the center of the city. One building, for some reason, is missing its entire facade, which seems bad.
Because of the earthquake.
That'll do it. But the rest of
hmm
the buildings are standing. I mean,
hmm
there's a lot of rubble in the street, but
Yeah. So this is okay. So this is like the day after the earthquake, and I'll share this on social media, but I think it's wild. So there's like a building missing a facade, so like a dollhouse. You can see inside and see the rooms. And then there are people sitting on the street, sitting in the rubble, kind of sitting in chairs, looking down a big hill, and the fire's just 2 blocks away. It's coming for them, you know? So I'm sure all of this area was destroyed as well.
yeah, but you don't know
So.
that. I mean, you don't know that it's coming for you when you're looking at it because fires change directions all the time.
No, I think you know it's coming for you. I'll tell you why a little bit because it came for everyone, pretty
Jeez, all right,
much.
Jill.
Um, remember that the earthquake happened at 5:12 a.m. on April 18th, 1906. It was a 7.9 earthquake and it was like 42 seconds long, which is just so unbelievably long. I can't even imagine. So a lot of people died immediately. Chimneys fell, buildings collapsed, and then do you remember what happened to the fire chief by
He
chance?
walked home. He was sleeping in the living room, but he walked in to check on his wife, and he walked into an
Mhm.
open hole.
Yes. So he goes straight to the hospital. That is Chief Sullivan. He never wakes up. He
Jeez.
is like, he's there. They don't tell him what's happening. He dies a couple of days later. So the fire chief, he doesn't make it. But um, so there's like an acting fire chief that I'll tell you about in a second, but the fire chief dies. I also posted and sent you a text that I got a crowbar because I said I would have one.
But yeah, he did.
So
I'm proud of
um,
you.
thank you. And I was gonna bring it in here to show you, but then I was like, I should keep it under my bed. Duh, that's like where it needs to be. So I left it under my bed, so it's there.
I've also seen crowbars before.
I know, I know. So I have a crowbar, but so also I'll add shoes under there. And then the third rule is to make sure you have water because water is going to be a big problem in San Francisco, like literally right now. So almost immediately after the earthquake, communication is cut off between San Francisco and the rest of the world. The telegraph system, telephone system, everything is down, and the earthquake is pretty much over. It has a couple little aftershocks in the next couple days, but the earthquake damage is done. Like that is already done, and now it's time for the fire. So, and we talked about this before because of societies like in London in 1666, like there was just fire. That was the only option. You know, like you had candles, you had a fire in your house. And then in Chicago, you know, there was like you have a gas stove, you have gas lights. And then now in San Francisco, some things have electricity, like the businesses usually do, but homes usually still have like gas lighting and gas for everything. So immediately there are a bunch of fires because gas mains are broke, chimneys fall down. There's little fires kind of all over the city, but a lot of them are put out by people because they're like in their house. So if you're like in your kitchen and you see a fire, like we've talked about this before, like you saw a big fire in like a window or like a mirror and you like had to go put it
Oh
out.
my God. Yeah, terrifying.
Yeah, but oh, so that probably happened hundreds of times, but someone was there. So you're at your house, you do it. So there's no like, it doesn't spread. It's just you at your house. But then a lot of places where the commercial buildings where there's maybe like one night watchman, but not a lot of people. So those fires got out of hand like really quickly. Um, Most businesses did have electric lights, but it was mostly the gas like lines exploding that started all of the fires. By 7:30 a.m., so about 2 hours after the earthquake, all of the gas had been cut off, and it would be cut off for 23 days. So for 23 days, they would not have access to gas. And what people will do later is they will build stoves out of bricks on the street. So people were outside cooking for about a month. They weren't allowed like back in their homes to like have open flames and do things like that. I also wrote, I have no idea how to do that. If you're
What
like
month
make a
was
sto
this?
it was April.
Okay, so it wasn't like freezing cold or
It's not
anything.
freezing. I mean, it's San Francisco, so it's like
I mean, San
foggy
Francisco gets pretty cold.
and damp. It's like damp, but like
Yeah, yeah.
not in the world. So within fires about 3 to 4 days long, there are 30 different fires about that kind of like converge like into one big fire. It destroyed approximately 25,000 buildings. 490 blocks were destroyed. And in today's money, the damage would be $8.5 billion. So it just like destroyed the city. In the beginning, the death toll that they were saying was about 300, but like that cannot be true. You know, like we talked about with like the other fires, like that's ridiculous. Like there's so many people whose bodies you're never going to find, and people who you don't know were in a certain place or whatever. And especially like they were discounting the people in Chinatown for a long time. So now that they started to count them, then we think the number is a little bit higher. So obviously, like the death toll is probably closer to like 3,000, if not more. A lot of bodies were just like unable to be found because they were burned so badly. They were just like part of this rubble. The chief dies. But I do want to emphasize that Chief Sullivan, a lot of the good that happened during the fire and how prepared they were because of him. He made sure that his department, they were fully trained. They did a ton of drills. They were like ready to help. The problems that they had were like, water and like the fire was huge and all the things, but like the firemen were as ready as they could have been. And that was because of him. So now that now that he is essentially dead, he dies a couple days later, but they never talk to him again. There's going to be a new chief that is going to have to step up, and then the military is going to get involved as well. There are a lot of stories of things like, and I hate this. I think this is like the worst thing of like parents dying and like the kids being left alone, and like trying to figure out what to do. So like finding like a baby by itself. Like I hate that. It makes me so upset. But like,
Yeah.
you know, so like a lot of like that is happening. So right when it happens, when the fire starts, the last message that the Navy gets out of San Francisco to the rest of the world, like over the wires, they say, earthquake, town on fire, send Marines and tugs, and that's it. So rest of the country kind of starts to know that it's happening, and they start to send relief, but they really don't know like the extent of what's going on there. Oakland is not on fire. San Francisco is, so people are able to like escape to Oakland. We'll talk about that in a second. So some stories, just like some like anecdotal stories, like from people who are like doing really brave things, really crazy things are happening to them as this fire is just like building and building. The author Jack London, do you know who that is? He wrote like The Call
That's
of the
familiar.
Wild about the
Oh
dog.
yeah, yeah, you go. Yeah, yeah.
So he lived 40 miles away, and Collier's magazine called him that morning and they said, can you go to San Francisco and tell us what happened? So him and his wife went to San Francisco and they kind of just like walked through the city as it was burning and like talked to people and like met people. And he wrote an article for Collier's and I listened to it today. It's available on Wikipedia. Someone did like an audio version of it. And some of the things that, he says is, San Francisco is gone. The earthquake is going to make this so much harder. So this isn't like a fire in a place where like things aren't already destroyed. You know what I mean? Like there's like the rippling of the streets and all the water mains are broken and all the gas mains are broken. So the town is already destroyed and then it's on fire, which makes it like that much worse, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and people were like, he said people were very calm. He saw someone offering $1,000, which is like a shit ton of money in 1906, to help bring like a wagon of trunks somewhere, and then no one would help him. And he eventually saw those trunks on fire. Like everything caught on fire. People were like, I was this like yesterday I was worth $600,000 and today I have nothing. And he went to a man's house and the man was like, this is my house. Like it'll be gone in 15 minutes. And he was like, this is my wife's china. He's like, look at my piano. Isn't it beautiful? And like, he knows it's going to be destroyed because of the fires coming, which is like horrifying and
Okay,
really
Taylor,
sad.
you have 15 minutes to.
Miles says save the piano
Okay, so that was what I was going to ask you. You have 15 minutes to save the three most valuable things.
in my home.
Yes.
I feel like I have like papers, like our passports and like our birth certificates and stuff. So I feel like I'd want to save those. I also feel like I thought about it like, I don't know. I feel like I would just like take a bunch of clothes and like underwear and like pajamas. Because like a lot of people are going to be like dirty for a really fucking long time after this because there's no running water. And water is um so important, thank you, Miles, and so rare that like you can only use it for drinking and cooking. You can't use it to like take a shower,
Yeah.
you know?
What I thought was I would take my laptop, cell
Mm.
phone, chargers, and papers.
Chargers is a good one to remember. Yeah.
Because that's like the
Okay.
only connection you can really have to the outside world. But
Hmm.
if we came together, then we'd be set.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It'll be
Okay.
fine.
We have
No
a
big deal.
plan. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so people are thinking, so there's some rumors, and this happens in every disaster, but there's rumors that like this is the end of the world. People are like, Chicago's on fire too, like every major city is on fire, like the world is ending, which like obviously is not what happened, but people were kind of panicking a little bit. Um, there were a couple hotels, obviously, and apartment houses that collapsed, and they're just full of bodies, and we'll just never know what happened to those people. I think we talked about that last week, but they're just once they're trapped in the rubble, and then the fire comes, and we'll never know. One of the fires, so it's several fires that kind of converge into one. So one fire is called the ham and eggs fire. They tried to say that a woman was making breakfast, but I don't think that that's true. I think like that could have happened anywhere, but that ends up being one of the worst ones. I don't really know San Francisco geography, but this one is like south of Market Street, and that one ended up being the worst, but other fires were starting like simultaneously. People were doing the same thing that they did in Chicago, where they were like burying their stuff. So they would like bury all their china, bury their pianos, like try to like bury stuff so it would be safe from the fire. But a lot of that stuff was like so hot. And another thing that I think is it's science, but it's wild, is like the oxygen is one of the things that makes things catch on fire. So people had stuff in like a safe at their house, and they couldn't open the safes for at least a month because one organization tried to open theirs on May 2nd. So April 18th to May 2nd. And as soon as they opened it, everything caught on fire inside of it because it's still
Wow.
so hot inside. And then once the oxygen hits it, that's when it ignites. So they had to wait like at least a month to open things that were like super sealed, which I think is crazy. Um, it's the same story that we had heard over and over. We heard it in London, we heard it in Chicago, where people were like charging a lot for like their carriages and their cars and to get people out of the town. So the prices were like obviously increasing. Like, of course they would. Um, one person in the book I read, one person said like if he thinks that because in the Bible when in Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot's wife turns around and turns into salt.
Why would I know that?
I don't know. It's like a famous story. But someone was like, I think that she didn't die from that. I think she died from carrying her trunk out of this town. Because like everyone was carrying all their shit. Like one guy had like was carrying his dead wife. People were carrying, all they could, just trying to like get away, like save their couple little things. But then that got me thinking, like, why would you have a trunk ever as your luggage? It's going to be super heavy and it's like a brick. So I was like, when did we invent luggage with wheels? And do you want to guess what year we invented that?
I mean, when did we invent wheels? Did we have wheels back then? Did they know that round things roll back then?
First, it was 1906. We've had wheels for like thousands of years.
Oh, okay.
Oh my God.
Sorry.
Um, anyway, it was 1970, which I think is way late to figure out that you should put wheels on your luggage. A man named Bernard D. Sadow invented rolling luggage in 1970 and patented it in 1972.
Can you copy and paste his name and find out what his net worth is? 'Cause I bet it was like $3 billion.
I mean, like, I can't believe we didn't think of that earlier. It's real dumb, everyone, to have like a
Brilliant.
really heavy trunk. So, um, people are trying to just like get out with whatever they have. One fun story is the California Academy of Sciences on Market Street had a goddamn hero named Alice Eastwood. She was a self-taught botanist, and she had preserved a ton of plant specimens and had all of the science material and things there. And so she went in the middle of the fire, climbed over the all of the broken stuff from the earthquake and saved a shit ton of scientific research. She climbed up 6 stories through all the rubble, got as much as she could, and she lowered it down to her friends with a rope, and they were able to save it. She had to move it several times, but she saved a lot of scientific work then. So great job, Alice. People were rushing to the water. So Oakland was out on fire. So they needed to like get their ferries were just like moving people across the bay to places that like obviously were not engulfed in flames. Um, at the pier, it was women and children first. And that reminded me that Lindsay also my cousin Lindsay wrote to us because she said that like you kind of backed into being on the right side of that women and children first argument because like essentially it is based on like the patriarchal idea that women are nurturers, but also I'm for it because I want to be first on the boat.
If you want to be a true feminist, Taylor, you will sacrifice your life to save mine.
I will not. I will be first on the boat with my kids. So I have to grapple with that on my own.
Fair.
Um, over in Oakland, the three major English language papers um, printed a paper to get together the next day. So they did like a joint newspaper to tell people what was going on. A lot of people went to their workplaces to save them because they were like, my house is okay, or my house is gone. So what do I do next? I'm going to go to my office and try to save it because this is my place of employment. And like, I don't want to be a dick, but like, I would literally never do that.
I mean,
Like, could you imagine like going to our old office and being like, I'm super worried about this? I'd be like the last thing I would think of.
no, I guess not. I guess like my relationship to my place of employment is different now than it was back then. So maybe I would now. But
Yeah,
also,
I just
everything's online, everything's in the cloud, everything's
right.
digital.
Like
So it's like,
now,
who
I
gives a
would never
shit?
do that. But like
Yeah, it's
again, the
like
people did that then. But I was just was like, oh my God, I would literally never risk my life to save my office.
we have to save the Staples chairs.
Yeah, no, like this is a $1,500 chair, but still, it has wheels. You could like push stuff out on it.
No, they clearly
Um,
did not have wheels on chairs. If it took that long to invent wheels on luggage, they definitely didn't have wheels on chairs until like
actually, this is
2013, probably.
no. I think I'm gonna fact check myself. Um, who invented chairs with wheels? Because I think it's Charles Darwin.
Wait, it's Darwin?
Yeah. Okay. I thought it was Thomas Jefferson, but the internet is telling me now it's Charles Darwin. I'm going to Quora for no reason. Um, but it was a long time ago, like longer ago than Wheels on Luggage.
Well,
Now people are saying no. I thought maybe it was Thomas Jefferson. Either way, the history of the office chair. Anyway, well, maybe we'll get there. So
Taylor, why don't we just like put our heads together and just list off everyday items and figure out if they're better with chairs on it?
with wheels,
Wheels.
I love everything about that idea. I'm 100% in.
We'll guys, the next we'll do a bonus episode where we just list off every item we can
Yeah,
think of.
5,000%. So people were doing that. Like one photographer got a lot of really good shots of the city because he went to a photography store and the guy was like, take anything you want. It's gonna get burned anyway. So just like take it. I know you have not seen Pee-wee's Great Adventure, right? I mentioned it during the Alamo episode.
Yeah, I think I have.
So do you remember
Well,
the pets?
I haven't seen all of them, but I've definitely seen. I mean, I have. No, you didn't say. Was it Pee Wee?
Yeah,
Okay, maybe not. I'm talking about the other guy who, um, the other weird guy. He also got caught jerking off in a theater.
not Pee-wee?
He goes to death row.
Ernest?
Ernest. I'm confusing Ernest with Pee Wee. Okay, disregard.
Blair and I watched Ernest Saves Halloween or one of them recently, and it's still pretty fun. Um, so okay, so in Pee-wee's Great Adventure, he is somewhere and there's a pet store on fire, and he is like, I gotta see the animals. So he goes in and he's like opening the cages, and there's like monkeys and there's dogs and cats and like bunnies, and he's holding the fish tanks. Every time he goes in, he sees a cage full of snakes, and he's like, ugh, every single time. And he brings out all the animals out, and finally the last animals in there are the snakes. So he comes out of the burning building and he's holding two handfuls of snakes, and he's like, "Ah," and he hates it. It's so funny. But during this great fire, two young men did save all the pets of a pet store, which is very nice. They broke the windows.
Yeah, that would be me. While you're saving the orphans from the orphanage, I'm saving the animals for sure.
Perfect. Um, I don't know if you remember last week we talked about the Palace Hotel, which was like the nicest hotel in town, and it
Yeah,
had
Patty
survived.
Arbuckle.
It was earthquake proof. Oh, really? Is that where that was?
I thought it was. Yeah.
Cool. But it burned down. They rebuilt it in 1909 and it's still there, but the original one did burn down, even though it did survive the earthquake. Um, Another kind of fun thing that happened is there was a bank called the Bank. A lot of the banks, I mean, they burned down. But the Bank of Italy was run by a man named Amedeo Pietro Gianni, and he was the owner, and he took all of the money to his house, which was like $2 million, so like a shit ton of money. He took it to his house. He had some men guard it, and he was able to give loans and take deposits. So he was really important in like rebuilding because he knew all of his customers, he knew what they needed. He was able to like, loan money to get more money. And in 2 years, the Bank of Italy was in a new building and kind of ready to go. And he pioneered branching. Um, so he was like one of the first people to like have like branches of his bank like around the city. And then in the 1920s, he merged with a smaller bank in Los Angeles and became the Bank of America, which is pretty
I.
cool.
Yep. So my, well, not my first job, but the longest job I had before we worked together was at Bank of America, and so I looked at the
Nice.
history of it and was like, wild.
Pretty cool. Um, I don't know if you remember, but also there was an opera the night before the earthquake, and the singer Enrico Caruso, he's the one who saved his signed picture of Teddy Roosevelt. That's the thing that he saved. But he said, "I will never return to San Francisco," and he didn't. He died, like 20 years later. But he also looked awesome. So if you ever want to look up Enrico Caruso. He looks amazing. Um, some buildings were saved by locals. So there was a cathedral that was saved by people. And what they did is one guy climbed to the roof and he tied a rake to a rope, lowered the rake down, and they attached a hose to the rake and he pulled it up and soaked the roof so that it wouldn't catch on fire. As fire was kind of going through the air and like ashes and embers were flying through the air, they'd land on the roof and they would just chop off those shingles, just to like stop it as much as they could. So a lot of people were able to do that. People would soak sheets in wine and put them on their roofs just to like try to get the fire to stop. And another building that was saved was the Mint that had all the gold and like the money in it was saved by a few people who were very invested in saving it. And it was one of the only buildings to survive in like downtown San Francisco. The people were inside fighting the fire as it kind of came closer and closer. And when it ended, they, opened the doors to nothing, which was just like crazy. They were like in this building protecting it and then not even really paying attention. And then like everything was gone when they opened the doors. Um, so a little bit more about how they actually stopped the fire, because it wasn't rain and the winds didn't change. Like it was stopped, but not before it spread. So the hydrants and sewers started to dry up. Not all of them, but a lot of them did. And the active fire chief Daugherty Daughtry. He was in charge, and he was trying to create fire breaks, but they were doing it like the absolute wrong way. They were using gunpowder and dynamite, and they were only knocking down buildings that were already on fire. But what you have to do is be like ahead of it by a lot,
Yeah.
you know?
Knock over the next building.
So they're knocking down buildings that were already on fire. So when they essentially bombed the buildings, all of the embers and the air would just set the next house on fire. So it would just like keep going, you know? So that really helped it like get bigger and bigger. There was a
Yeah, but it
general,
kind of works though.
well, it didn't work.
No, but no, no. If you play it out to its end conclusion, it would work because if you just did that all night long, eventually you would have destroyed every house, thereby extinguishing the fire when it hit the ocean.
Sure, sure, sure. If everything's gone, then there's no fire.
Well, there you go. So it would have worked.
Congratulations. Um, that
Couldn't bet
order
it.
came from that order came from General Frederick Funston, nicknamed Fearless Freddie. He was in the military and he got the military involved right away. His superior, General Major Greeley, Major General Greeley, he was out of town but was slowly coming back. But in the meantime, this kind of crazy dude, Frederick Funston, he did a whole bunch of stuff like he had a he was the one who said to use a dynamite to only do houses that were already on fire. He had like finally gotten a message out because a lot of messages were not getting out. People were like, obviously like send wanted some messages to their family. Like I remember when there was a earthquake in San Francisco in the 90s, my Aunt Vianne, who lives there, called and said, "We're okay," right before the phones went out, you know?
Yeah.
And we were like so grateful that she was able to get through to us because I remember calling and she's like, there's an earthquake, we're okay. And then the phones went out, and we at least knew she was okay. But these people don't, some people will never know what happened to their family. And some people are just like waiting for anything. So telegraphs and mail was free, but it took a long time for it to like, well, it took a while for it to get going. But they did eventually get, news over to DC. Teddy Roosevelt was the president. He asked people to donate to the Red Cross because this was 76 years before FEMA was spun up. So he asked people to donate to the Red Cross to be able to contribute. Taft was the Secretary of War, and he was, in contact with Funston and Greeley as well. So one thing that Funston did is he did kind of a pseudo martial law. Like it wasn't martial law. They would like say that later, but like it kind of was. So the order was anyone who was looting or, lighting a stove or a fire in a place that they shouldn't should be shot to kill. It was a shoot to kill order. So a lot of military people came over and they were fully armed and being like pretty aggressive. They would like yell at people who if they had like a candle lit. They would force people to help with certain things. And it's like they would have probably helped anyway. They didn't need to do it like at gunpoint, you know? But
I
it
am
was
in favor of like when everything's fucked beyond all belief, dealing with like basic human greed or criminality or whatever. It's like, dude, yeah, just fucking shoot them. Like we have way too many normal bodies to bury. We don't fucking need to deal with this shit anymore. Like,
yeah. I'm sure officially there were very few deaths by gunshot, but there were probably more. Like you said, like I'm sure that
yeah,
happened more often. And like one of them they killed a Red Cross worker by accident, like people were riled up and scared. And so the wrong time to have a gun. Um, but people, they were kind of forced to help, which I also, again, I think is kind of okay. Like they would have helped anyway. Like, what else are you going to do? Like help rebuild.
yeah.
So there was a fireboat called the Fireboat Leslie, and they tried to get water from the sea, but it was like the piers are wood. It was like hard to get to them. They did some pretty incredible things by like coupling hoses together, and some of the hoses would go for over a mile from the ocean to the houses, and that saved like a part of the city as well. They use sewer water, which is gross, but like, whatever you can
I
get
mean,
to not die.
it's 1900s. Like everything
Yeah.
probably smelled like shit anyways.
Exactly. I mean, it was like, I think one of the first things in the book that I read, The Longest Minute, was like everybody was wearing hats because you had to wear hats because like there's constantly like shit in the air, like there's everyone's burning coal, everyone's all these things. So like,
Yeah.
yeah, like no one smelled great. Um, but another thing they did is they stopped liquor sales almost immediately and they broke all the bottles of booze that they could. There was a distillery that had, because I don't want people to like get drunk and freak out, but also I'm like,
Yeah,
I really,
if anything,
I really need a
preserve
drink
the
right now.
liquor and like
I know,
ration it and like literally just give it out to people. Like, why would you?
I
It's
know,
the opposite.
I know. Um, there was a distillery that made whiskey, and they had like 100 barrels of whiskey, and they were like, "Excuse me, we basically have bombs. Like, we have this whiskey. Like, it is going to catch on fire. It's going to explode." So
Is that possible though? Because I was thinking about when you said the wine thing, it was like
I was
unless
thinking
it's
about
like
that too.
Everclear, like it's not flammable because the liquid content, the O2, H2O content has to be so significantly higher than the flammability of the liquor in there, right?
That's a good question, and I don't know. So please email us diptofellpod@gmail.com if you know, because I was thinking that too, but I was like, wine must have less of an alcohol content, and then like whiskey and like vodka and like hard liquor feels like that could be flammable more. Like, isn't that what a Molotov cocktail is? I don't know, all the things. But anyway, they moved all of the barrels of whiskey to a place that had already been burned so that it was like out of the way. Um, let's talk a little
Taylor,
bit about,
I literally reached over while you were like talking and I typed what into Google and I was gonna follow with what is in a Molotov cocktail and then I was like, that is for sure gonna flag me for the FBI. So I'm gonna go
I
ahead
mean,
and change.
you're on,
If anybody just happens to have that information handy or is willing to sacrifice their search history to the
no,
DTF,
I think that's just booze and then a rag
well, it's got to be more specific than that. It can't like what is it like? It can't just be like a
or a
Mai
billet.
Tai, right?
No, but it's like, but like,
A margarita,
no, yes, it has a salt rim on my Molotov cocktail.
little wedge of lime. That'd be so cute. That'd be such a cute
Glass
Molotov cocktail.
bottle. Oh, I guess it mostly has like gas in it, probably. Are
Okay,
Molotov cocktails legal? Is this question? Of course they're not legal. You're stupid. You were stupid if you're asking that question.
I mean the
Um,
components are legal if we figure out what's in it.
yeah, but you can bomb someone's house.
Yeah, but you
Dumb.
can own a Molotov. It's like owning a
I mean,
gun.
I own
It's
a Molotov
illegal to
cocktail.
own a
I
gun.
have bottles, I have rags, I have gas in my car,
We gotta stop recording our crimes.
Anyway, okay. Anyway, so another thing I talked about last week was like the relationship that the Chinese Americans had to the rest of the city. People in Chinatown didn't want to leave because they were afraid that they weren't, they were going to get deported, and they were right to be afraid. They had to, if they didn't have their papers, like they were definitely like in trouble. And a lot of people during the rebuilding wanted to just like not have a Chinatown and banned them from coming back to San Francisco proper. But that was ended up being overruled, and they were able to come back and build the Chinatown that is there today. People were definitely like scared. And then also, of course, like the soldiers who are just there in the under martial law are like raiding people's homes. So they raided Chinatown, which was like bummer to do
Yeah,
that. People started to make their own fire breaks. They had their own like committees. There were like people trying to figure out what to do because the communication is kind of all over the place. Everyone is like sleeping in parks. It gets really, really foggy. People are getting sick, sleeping on the ground. They have like one blanket. That's something that happens a lot in the other ones we talked about too, like outbreaks of cholera and the refugee camps, things like that. Everyone though is helping. Like if people are working, they're working. So people are like, they're helping in bakeries. They did not run out of food. They were able to like, feed a lot of people. Everyone was pitching in. At one point, someone had like there were like 2,000 chickens and like a I don't know, chicken farm that they like let loose, and everybody was like grabbing chickens, which I think is hilarious because also I would not know what to do with the
with a
chicken.
chicken. I mean, you
I would
you
like
cut its
take
head
out
off, right?
its feathers. Yeah, and then what?
Yeah, you cut its head off. You pluck its feathers. I guess they didn't have fried chicken back then, so like you
They
probably
never
have
had
just
fried,
like
they've always had fried chicken. Um, Either way, people are pitching in, kind of helping each other. Another person who is a hero from this time is Lieutenant Frederick Freeman. He was on a boat, and him and his men stopped the fire from spreading on day 3. They went to like a big portion of the city and were able to save it. He worked kind of on his own with no direction, and so he really, really saved a lot of people, saved a lot of property, and later in his life during World War I, he was the captain of a ship that was torpedoed. And then he was so upset about it, he started drinking and going into addiction, ended up being dishonorably discharged and kind of living like a vagrant lifestyle. But in 1941, before he died, FDR pardoned him and gave him an honorable discharge because of all the work that he did during the earthquake and other great things he'd done before that. But he had like felt so guilty about being torpedoed. Um, but so people are working together and they are working really hard. Like 80% of the city is destroyed. But the mail was working by Friday, which is a big deal because it was like Tuesday to Friday. The mail was working. People were able to, talk to to tell their family around the country, around the world that they were safe. And the fire ended up stopping because, the people stopped it. They did the correct fire breaks. It didn't rain. It wasn't anything like that. It just like they ended up stopping. And also, obviously, like, it ran out of shit to burn because it was like it burned most of the city. In the aftermath, there was no water. So we just talked about this, like for bathing, so people were getting sick. People had to dig poop holes in their backyards. Like it was like a pretty bad like sanitation issue for a while. People were giving donations, but some of the donations had strings attached. Like there was a part of the city that did not have cable cars, and the cable car company was like, "We'll donate, $100,000 if we can build a car in this place where we couldn't have one before." Things like that. So a little bit of
Yeah.
corruption happened. Um, the judge who was the judge of the Wong Kim Ark case that we talked about last time, he was actually the president of the American Red Cross at this time. So he was able to like he like invested a lot and like helped in San Francisco. The Empress of China tried to donate money and the people were like no, which is so racist and dumb. Take
Yeah,
everyone's money.
stupid.
Like I hate in a movie when someone's like, I'm too moral to take this check. I'm like, I'll take that check. Thank you.
Yeah, no kidding.
Like you're dumb.
I have no
Um,
principles.
yeah. People were given tents. Some people had insurance. So some insurance companies paid out. A lot of the ones that were based overseas or on the East Coast never really paid out what they were supposed to pay out. Because a lot of it, and I don't know if I'm sure you remember this from owning a home in California, but like you have to have separate earthquake insurance from your
Oh
regular
yeah.
home insurance. And so people had to prove that their house was destroyed by the fire and not by the earthquake. And
Yeah,
like, how
I
do you
can
do that?
believe it.
You
It
know?
was like when I
So
was
some,
living in Florida and I knew people who were homeowners in Florida and they had to get separate hurricane or flood insurance from
yeah.
everything else. And
Hmm.
yeah, it was, yeah, expensive.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of people ended up living in little housing camps. So they would build these like little like 200 square foot houses and then you could move them later. So you would like put down a down payment and then end up being able to move the house to maybe where your original land was or moving it. Um, all of the little houses were blue because the army had extra blue paint, which is kind of fun.
That's
There
cute.
was another story where like the army had all these boots that were the wrong color and the people didn't want to wear them, so they were in a storage room, so they just gave them to everybody, which is also cute.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, yes, so this is kind of where I stopped my research about like the rebuilding and such, but they rebuilt better than before. But I think that the thing that is so scary about this is just like one disaster after the other. And like a fire could happen anywhere, but like that earthquake was crazy and it's going to happen again. Like California is not safe. We're going to have other earthquakes. So this reminded me, my friend Morgan sent me a article about that tower that you had talked about in San Francisco that's falling or tilting, the
Yeah.
Millennium Tower. So I read an article about it. So it's called the Millennium Tower, and it's on Mission Street, which is one of the streets that was like totally destroyed in the Mission District. And it is like 6 inches off. And like the lady that in the article she sent me like figured it out because like she was like doing a putt-putt in her apartment, in her $3 fucking million apartment. And all of the golf balls would like go into one corner.
I mean, okay, yeah, you know what? Never mind. I was good.
What?
I was good. Well, because my house is also like not level, but like
Wait,
it's a
but you're on the
house.
first floor. You're on a
I know, but I
ranch.
know exactly. It's different when you're like 40 stories in the air. I get it. Yep, it's different.
Yeah, like if my house was tilted a little bit, meh, I'm on I'm on bedrock,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
like
More
I'm
or
not worried
less.
about it. But like this like gigantic tower um is oh my God, it's crazy.
Also, it's funny to
And
think that $3 million in San Francisco, that's probably like a starter condo. for anyone who lives there.
I cannot imagine. Like, so it's 58 floors, the whole building. Um, but they say they have 60 floors because they skipped 13, which happens, and 44 because people think the fours are bad luck. Have you heard that
Really?
before? Yeah, I don't know. I haven't
Uh,
really heard that before. But um, Jesus Christ, I'd be so fucking mad if I bought a $3 million
did they
condo.
fix it?
No, it's like they're trying to figure out how to fix it.
What's it called? Millennium?
Uh-huh. It makes you kind of want to throw up a little bit. Like even it makes me so upset and like so nervous.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe in like 3,000 years, your home will be like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and it'll be a landmark for people to visit.
But also like there's no way that if there's an earthquake that isn't toppling over literally immediately.
I know. If I was a neighbor, I'd be like, I want a refund.
Yeah. And you can't, you know? Like,
Not
oh God, I
good.
hate it so much. Like I really like it. Honestly, my hands hurt. You know, like you get nervous and your hands hurt talking about things. Like I just hate it so much. I don't know what to do. Um, so yeah, I mean I know that, this it was a good time to like Industrial Revolution time is a good time to start over on a city so they could build better because like they had done things like, we should have stronger construction, we should not build everything out of wood, but like they hadn't retroactively put those laws in place. So if you have to start over, at least you can start over better. In some cases they did, some cases they didn't. Some people just wanted a place to live like really quickly. Those camps were open for years. People trying to figure out where to go. Like in all these disasters, rich people could figure it out, but poor people, they have fucking nothing, What are they supposed to do? But now there just seems to be a lot of tall buildings in San Francisco, which makes me nervous.
Man, this millennial thing.
I hate it so much. I was in New York. So the week that this was 13 years ago, but the week that we had our wedding reception in New York City, we had to move it because there was a hurricane. So there was like hurricane time, so we had to cancel our reception, do it a couple months later. It was fine. But that week there was also an earthquake, and I was on the 38th floor of a building, and I felt my desk go bloop bloop, and I was like,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
nothing
It's
to do with
interesting
that.
too because California has like probably some of the strictest regulatory guidelines for building things, and you think that like, how was this able to happen?
I mean, in 1906 or this Millennium Tower.
No, the Millennium Tower.
Yeah, no,
Also, like,
100%.
it's got to be like a developer's worst nightmare to have like a bunch of millionaires living in your building when your building like fucks up really badly because like they're going to sue you into oblivion, and it sounds like that's what they're doing right now.
But they're not gonna like what are they and like the woman in the article I read, I'll share the article, but like a like tech bro bought the apartment above her for like $15 million and he was like, I don't care that it's tilting, I like the view. And I'm like, you're the worst.
I mean, that would be the dream to be that rich. We Taylor, you
Like
might say he's the
nothing.
worst, but we would both love to be in that position.
I would not want to live there.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't want to live there. How
No, I'm
scary.
on a I'm on a no from that.
Guys, just live on level land. I have no idea how we got to this conclusion in the San Francisco fire episode, but that is my takeaway.
I think we both live in one-story houses and I'm happy that we do.
Amen. Please don't move. Sweet. So that
Yeah.
is we got San Francisco, we got Chicago wrapped up. I'm sure there's plenty more fires
I
awaiting
know. Well, I'm
us.
gonna start doing Women's History Month next week, and I'm very excited to have some fun stories. But if you know women's history, you know there is a very important fire that I will talk about. But I was going to do it next week, but I'm just so tired of talking about fires that I'm going to maybe do it the week after.
Good. I don't know what that is.
I'm sure if you know, you know, but I'll tell you later.
I will probably know after you tell me because you know that you know me, I don't connect dots real quick. It takes a little bit for the marinade, and so I'm sure I'll know when you tell me. So,
Okay, cool.
but yeah, that was awesome. Thanks for sharing, Taylor. We got our episodes in for the week. Sorry for the late start, per usual. It was my fault, but we got them taken care of.
I re-released Mutiny on the Bounty today, so there's something out there.
Enjoy some mutiny.
Yeah.
Cool. Again, write to us at doomdefaultpod@gmail.com. Find us on the socials at Doomed to Fail Pod. We're trying to become rich and famous, and I don't think that's a bad thing.
No, tell your
I think
friends.
y'all should want us to be rich and famous because some
We
of y'all
really
know
like doing
us.
this. Yeah,
We
come
like
on.
doing this. It's like
Come on.
and like as our friends, we'll give you VIP passes to our live shows at Madison Square
1000%.
Garden
Email us today with your name and you will be on the list forever.
forever. Says a lot. Sweet.
Cool.
Anything else
Thanks, Lars.
before we shut off?
That's it. Just that those fun things from Morgan were fun. And she gave me some other good ideas of things to cover. And a couple people have sent us Instagram messages of like some true crimey things. So I'll make sure you see them.
Love it.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, go ahead and cut things off and